Welcome, everyone, to the Anomalous Coalition live stream AMA event. I'm your host for the evening, Kelly Chase. Most of you probably know me as the host of the UFO Rabbit Hole podcast or as the writer and executive producer of the docuseries Cosmosis, UFOs, and a New Reality. For today's AMA, we have four incredible guests who are with us tonight to answer your questions and to celebrate the premiere of the phenomenal second season of Leslie Kean's docuseries UFOs Investigating the Unknown, which is now streaming on Hulu and Disney Plus. Before we get started, let's roll the trailer.
Were they human or non-human biologics?
More and more scientists feel comfortable talking about this.
What do they actually know?
Have you seen the spacecraft?
Oh my gosh.
We're in the fight now to force the government to disclose.
I saw what I thought were children.
People really don't know this is real.
Identifying the unidentified.
If you haven't checked out UFOs Investigating the Unknown yet, you absolutely should. Links should be down in the episode description, and you can also find it on Hulu and Disney Plus. Now, I'm going to start out by introducing our guests. Leslie Kean is an investigative journalist and author of the 2010 New York Times bestseller, UFOs, Generals, Pilots, and Government Officials Go on the Record. For over 2 decades, her work on UFOs and UAPs has been featured in major outlets, including a 2021 profile in The New Yorker. She and reporter Ralph Blumenthal have written groundbreaking articles for The New York Times, starting with a 2017 front page story on a secret Pentagon UFO program, the Nimitz incident, and the release of the famous Gimbal and FLIR Navy videos. In 2023, they broke the story of whistleblower David Grush in The Debrief, leading to a congressional hearing on UAP crash retrievals. Leslie also collaborates with Break Thru Films, producing UFOs Investigating the Unknown for NatGeo and CNN, which is why we're all gathered here today. Her award-winning 2017 book, Surviving Death, inspired a Netflix documentary series, and she co-authored a play exploring the implications of UFO disclosure. Leslie is currently looking for the right producer to partner with to bring this play to life. So if you're a producer in the New York City area, you can direct inquiries through the contact page on Leslie's website at lesliekean.com. Our next guest is Dr. Hal Puthoff. Dr. Hal Puthoff is president and CEO of Earth Tech International, Inc., and director of the Institute for Advanced Studies at Austin. Earning his PhD from Stanford University in 1967, Puthoff's professional background spans decades of research at General Electric, Sperry, the National Security Agency, Stanford, and SRI International. He has published numerous papers on electron beam devices, lasers, and space propulsion, and has patents issued in the energy, laser, and communications fields. Puthoff regularly serves various corporations, foundations, and the DoD and intelligence communities as an advisor on leading-edge technologies and future technology trends. Up next, we have Dr. Jim Segala. Dr. Jim Segala is a prominent researcher at the Institute for Advanced Studies at Austin. He conducted groundbreaking experiments in radiobiology, quantum entanglement, quantum optics, vacuum polarization, and neurobiology, earning him recognition as a leading authority. Most notably, Dr. Segala was the lead scientist on the Anomalous Phenomenon study team, which investigated the correlation between the observation of aerial phenomena like UAPs and orbs and the reported physiological effects, including injuries, aberrations, etc., experienced by the observer. The startling outcome of the study showed a statistically significant link between the presence of anomalous phenomena and the physical effects of the witnesses. Dr. Segala brings over 30 years of distinguished experience in the scientific and engineering domains, focusing on designing and constructing sophisticated experimental systems. Holding a PhD in physics and advanced degrees in engineering, Dr. Segala has significantly contributed to research and innovation across multiple fields. Dr. Segala is a familiar face in the media, having appeared as a subject matter expert on various TV programs, including The Secret of Skinwalker Ranch and the Discovery Channel's Mystery at Blind Frog Ranch, and also UFOs Investigating the Unknown. Dr. Garry Nolan is our final guest. He is the Ratchford and Carlotta A. Harris Professor of Pathology at Stanford University and a leader in immunology, cancer research, and advanced single-cell analysis. He's published over 330 research articles and is the holder of 50 US patents and has been honored as one of the top 25 inventors at Stanford University. His areas of research include oh my goodness. You'll have to tell me how to pronounce that later, Garry. Cancer and leukemia, autoimmunity and inflammation, and computational approaches for network and systems immunology. Dr. Nolan is also the co-founder of the Soul Foundation, a leading center for UAP research, bringing together experts from academia, government, and various disciplines to conduct rigorous studies on UAP and their implications. Its mission focuses on advancing public and policy-oriented research, providing advisory services to governments and corporations, and educating the public on the scientific, societal, and cosmological impacts of UAP discoveries. You can learn more about the Soul Foundation at thesoulfoundation.org. So thank you all for being here with us tonight. For the next 3 hours, we'll be diving deep with our guests and asking them more questions about UFOs investigating the unknown. To get the most out of our time, we'll be dividing this live stream into 4 parts. In the first part, we'll be focusing on questions for Dr. Hal Puthoff. Next, we'll be hearing from Dr. Segala, followed by Dr. Nolan, and we'll end our time with the woman of the hour, Leslie Kean. However, our guests are all welcome to contribute to the conversation throughout, so we'll be hearing from everyone. So thank you all for being here. I really appreciate it.
Thanks for having us.
Well, let's dive right in. I know we've got a ton of questions tonight, but I know a question that's really kind of at the top of everyone's mind right now is a few hours from now, Jake Barber is scheduled to come out as a new whistleblower on News Nation. And since we have Garry here, I wanted to ask him a question. Because you are an advisor, correct, to the Skywatcher team, which Barber is also involved with. Are you able to share any of your thoughts about what you think about Barber coming forward as a whistleblower?
Well, I think what it underscores are the kinds of comments that have been made by many people over the last few years about the numbers of whistleblowers coming forward. And, with the entree of David Grush, as well as, of course, Lou Elizondo prior to that, what you're seeing is a form of acclimatization where people who previously might not have felt comfortable coming forward are now saying, okay, well, hey, they didn't get locked up. They've shown us how to be careful about how we talk about this. I feel comfortable coming forward as well. And so, what I think is unique about Jake and the team that he's participated in assembling behind Skywatcher is that it's not just him who's claims to have been involved with retrievals, crash retrievals or otherwise, but other members of the team, all of whom have military backgrounds, have military clearances, have the kinds of experience, if you listen to what it is that they have to say tonight, that is completely comports with what you would expect from somebody who would be involved in a crash retrieval. And so my being asked to be involved with the team is not because I have any experience with crash retrievals, but they wanted a scientist on board to help design some of the kinds of experiments and data collection, to be the neutral observer, to make sure that when they do talk about what it is that is observed, it's provided, I help them provide the necessary caveats so that people don't come to premature conclusions. Because it's very easy. I mean, people want to come to conclusions. I would love to come to a lot of conclusions in my work, but there's a way to talk about all of this, which is frankly what the Soul Foundation has been about, is how to limit the conversation in a way and how to teach people to talk about things that don't get you backed into a corner. So I spent a lot of time with Jake and members of his team, the others who we'll be talking about tonight, and they are both professional, extremely well-versed in the subject matter that they're talking about, and believe as much as did Lou Elizondo and David Grush that whatever it is that is being observed needs to be talked about openly, and that they're going to talk about some of the things that they were involved with that are parts of the stories you've heard for the last 40 or 50 years. So I'm excited about it. I hope people respect what Jake is doing and the chance that he's taking for not just himself and the family, but let's see how it goes. But I've seen a preview of what it is that the News Nation is going to be about, and I've seen a Skywatcher video that's going to be coming out after that, and I think people are going to be very pleased.
Well, that's very exciting. I know we all can't wait to see how that unfolds. Thanks for sharing that with us, Garry. All right, so we're going to kick it off to our first segment with Dr. Hal Puthoff. Before we do that, we have a clip to share with Hal from UFOs Investigating the Unknown, where he's talking about general relativity. So let's check that out first.
Just to try to make this more physical, you see a UFO coming along, and then it suddenly does a right angle turn. And people on the ground observing this will say, oh my God, if there's anybody inside that craft, they're going to be squished like tomato sauce. However, since space and time have been re-engineered and manipulated, in that situation, time can be running much faster. And so the people inside the spacecraft are looking out the window, and so they just take a nice leisurely turn.
Amazing. Well, Dr. Puthoff, thank you so much for being here. I'm just going to launch right into questions, if that's okay.
Okay, that's fine. Yes.
So I understand that you were a senior advisor and contractor for the Pentagon's highly classified UAP program, whose existence was revealed in a December 2017 New York Times article written by someone we all know. So exactly what was your role in that program?
Well, it turned out that back in 2008, the Defense Intelligence Agency got really concerned about the fact that there are so many observations of craft in the skies that seem to have these unusual characteristics and so on. And they also had access to Russian work behind the scenes that indicated that the Russians were also had a very large program to try to get to grips with all this kind of stuff. So anyway, they put out a request for analyses to be done by anyone who wanted to respond, and Bigelow Aerospace turned out to be the one that responded and was awarded the contract. Well, I'd been working with Robert Bigelow on other projects earlier on, so he contacted me and said, would you and Earth Tech be willing to be a subcontractor and help us get to the root of these kind of phenomena? So I said, sure, glad to do that. And so the original idea was that, okay, well, let's get in contact with aerospace corporations who are claimed to have access to materials from crash retrievals of UAP, as we call them, unidentified anomalous phenomena. And then we'll distribute them out to subject matter experts and see what they can tell us about these materials and so on. So we tried to negotiate something like that, but we were told this area, stay away from it. It's just too classified. So basically, what I decided to do at Earth Tech was, okay, had we been able to get access to materials, what would we have done with them? Well, we would have put them out to subject matter experts and had them give us their analyses without letting them know where the materials came from. Well, that was off the table, so I went to plan B, and that was, okay, I'll contact all these same subject matter experts from around the world who are experts in their various fields of advanced aerospace issues. And I'll say I'm just doing a kind of a general investigation that might be useful to Bigelow Aerospace. So where will your field be in the year 2050? So we figure by doing that, we're going to get analyses that were the best that these kind of people would have to offer about where their fields would be. And so it generated some 38, I commissioned 38 papers from people all around the world. It was an unclassified study at that point. So I had inputs from people from different countries. And so they described where their field would be. And we then took those series of reports that were provided to us, and we put them up on a highly classified at that time site in the Pentagon, and they could be distributed out to aerospace contractors and the intelligence community and the DoD. And so all these 38 were distributed that way. We were told that probably they would never see, the time of day in open publication, but since then, through Freedom of Information Act requests, most of them have been have come out, and they cover very exotic subjects like space-time metric engineering or effects due to injuries from encountering craft at too close range and so on. So anyway, these are now available. So I think that was the final output from at least my part of my participation.
Ah, fascinating. Thank you for sharing that. In that role, did you have the opportunity to brief congressional committees or AARO?
Yes, as part of having collected the information that we collected, I briefed the Senate Select Committee on Intelligence. I briefed the Senate Armed Services Committee. I did brief AARO, the All-Domain Anomaly Research Organization. So they have the information, including classified information that we obtained behind the scenes. And so that's all out there in various kinds of reports.
Oh, great. So pilots and others who encounter UAPs often state that their abrupt high-speed maneuvers appear to be way beyond our physics. Is that a reasonable conclusion?
When you hear that, that sounds very reasonable. I mean, after all, you've got pilots observing these craft coming from space, dropping down to the Earth within a few seconds, and then stopping on a dime, and then suddenly taking off at high Mach numbers and doing a right angle turn. So it's very reasonable. It's a natural thing for these pilots to say, this is just way beyond our physics. On the other hand, I approached it as a scientist in a different way, and I said, okay, if something is happening, it's got to somehow be part of our physics. So what I did was I took a piece of paper and I made a list on the left-hand side. What were the bizarre things that were being observed? Right angle turns at Mach 10, diving into the water with no splashes, all the weird, walking up to a craft that seemed small, but they got inside and it was giant, things that, now for me, the more weird those descriptions, the better I like them. Because if somebody is just making up a story, they want it to sound kind of rational and reasonable. Well, my list of weird descriptions were not rational or reasonable. They're all off the wall. I then took general relativity and said, okay, in all of our ordinary electromagnetic applications with computers and Wi-Fi and so on, we start out with a series of Maxwell's equations and outcome all the predictions, and we do our technology developments. In general relativity, Einstein's theory of general relativity, now that's used primarily for investigating astrophysical phenomena like mergers of black holes and neutron stars and so on. So I said to myself, suppose we could engineer Einstein's equations for general relativity the way we engineer Maxwell's equations for all of our electromagnetic effects. What would I expect to see? And so I made up a list on the right-hand side of the piece of paper, and they matched hand in glove with the weird observations being given on the left-hand side. Let me give you an example. For example, let's say, okay, you've got this thing going at right angle turns at Mach 10. If anybody were in there, they'd be turned into tomato sauce in the back of the ship. But anyway, when I apply the equations for general relativity affects time and space variables. So it turns out that one of the consequences in this case is that time runs faster inside the craft when it's engineered the way I'm proposing. And so for them, they're just taking a leisurely turn. Of course, when they look outside and see all of us on the ground, we all seem to be going in slow motion. But anyway, what appears to be an absolute unbelievably right-hand turn at Mach 10, for the people on the craft, that's not the case. Similarly, in reports of people approaching a craft, which is some particular size, and then when they get really close, the craft seems either much larger or much smaller. These are the kinds of things that general relativity would predict. Another example would be time running at different rates, so that if somebody supposedly has been taken aboard a craft and they're in there for a while and they come out and they find time has gone by much faster outside or at a different clip, and they think, well, maybe I've got missing time or whatever. Anyway, you go down this list of weird things, but they do match up with general relativity. Okay, so if we physicists know how it's working on the principle of general relativity, then why aren't we building them? Why aren't they aircraft? Well, it turns out that the one requirement that is a real challenge is you have to have enormous amounts of energy collected in very tiny volumes, extreme energy densities, and we can't do that. That's where we fall short. So I would say the physics is straightforward. It is within the physics that we know, but it's way beyond what we can do with our engineering.
Fascinating. Thank you. I feel like I learned something new about the observables. That's really exciting. Thank you.
Yeah.
Do you have any reason to believe that there's a so-called legacy program wherein NHI technology from crash retrievals has been obtained and attempts at reverse engineering has been or is being pursued?
Well, a program like that, crash retrievals and so on, and deep analysis, I mean, this is something that, if it's occurring, is still behind the scenes and highly classified. However, I've interacted with the various intelligence officers who've been given the job officially, actual official jobs, to dig out what's true about the so-called legacy programs, crash retrievals, and so on. People like David Grush, who appeared before Congress under oath, and he made the statement that, in fact, there is a legacy program. We do have access to crash retrieved craft, even crash retrieved biologics. Knowing him and where he came from, he was at the National Reconnaissance Office, National Geospatial Intelligence Agency, at the highest level of clearances. He interviewed, as he claimed in his statement before Congress, over 40 individuals over a 4-year period, and all this data was collected together, and it seems like there is that crash retrieval program. So although I can't say that I personally have been absolutely briefed on the crash retrieval program, I've interacted with people like Grush and many others whose I just simply can't say I'm not hearing the truth. So I would put my stamp on the idea that there is such a program.
Have you ever had a chance to examine any materials that are purported to be from these UAP crash retrieval programs?
I have examined some materials, very famous for people who follow this area, as bismuth magnesium samples. The downside is that it's a very incomplete chain of custody, but basically someone claimed that their grandfather had gotten this material, which was a piece of bismuth and magnesium bonded together in a series of layers that were, the size of human hairs. I mean, really terrifically detailed. And so that was sent to Art Bell on a TV show, and then he provided it to researcher Linda Howe. And when we set up an organization, To the Stars Academy of Arts and Sciences, we were able to obtain that. So we got that piece of material. Certainly is exotic to look at under microscope or whatever. We ended up doing a CRADA, what's called the CRADA, with an Army laboratory for them to examine it in great detail. It turned out that to examine it under the best of circumstances, it had to go to an even better lab. So they turned it over to AARO, the Alden Anomalies Research Organization, who then turned it over to ORNL, which is one of our nuclear laboratories that is so well outfitted. And so they did a lot of analysis, and we were supposed to get the results of that analysis, but we were told we couldn't see them because it was highly classified. So anyway, we complained about that because that was not part of the agreement. And as it turns out, it was highly classified, not particularly because of what they found, but because of it revealing what instrumentation the laboratory had used to evaluate it. And so, but nonetheless, two of us from the program, Dr. Eric Davis and myself, we were flown to the Pentagon, and we got to read the original reports and so on. And so it was really an astonishing report. There was no proof of isotopes that would be from an extraterrestrial location. So the idea that maybe we could prove it was ET because of isotope formation, that didn't pan out. But nonetheless, they had to agree that the putting together of these kinds of materials that you can never get to bond together hardly at microscopic levels was really quite unusual. In fact, separately, we had an aerospace corporation spend $1 million and mess up their equipment trying to bond these things together. So in the end, it's a mixed outcome. No proof that this came from an ET crash. It was supposed to be Roswell. But on the other hand, nothing that proved that, it couldn't possibly be the case. So anyway, we're about to publish a long paper on the details we got.
That's really interesting. Well, I mean, speaking of the extraterrestrial hypothesis, there are obviously potentially other places that it could have come from if it wasn't extraterrestrial, that could be potentially non-human. And one of those would be obviously an ultra-terrestrial possibility, which we actually have a clip with Hal to play right now from the show.
Where does it come from? Who's behind it? So I took that on as a challenge to say, okay, maybe the problem is that we've narrowed our scope too much. So maybe there's some group that's hidden out on the planet with these advanced technologies.
We believe that our reality is the story. That the story we're in is, in fact, the way the world really is. And when something doesn't make sense, it means you're being pushed outside of your story. The UFO phenomenon is trying to make us more aware that the story you're in is actually not true, that there's another kind of presence or another kind of mind or another kind of life force that is active in the world.
Let's open our blinders a bit and not be afraid to examine any potential hypothesis. Yes, it could be ET coming from another part of the galaxy. But what are the other options? And so I wrote a paper called Ultraterrestrials, which means that they're hidden out here. Maybe there was some investigation of Earth, let's say millennia ago, by some other species. And maybe they have hidden bases on the ocean seabeds that are very advanced. We should be able to get data that either permits us to accept or reject the hypothesis.
Wonderful. I'm a very big fan of the ultraterrestrial hypothesis. So, Dr. Puthoff, would you mind sharing just a little bit more about what your perspective is on the ultraterrestrial hypothesis, which posits that some observed phenomena may originate from hidden realms or dimensions on Earth rather than purely extraterrestrial sources?
Well, since it hasn't been pinned down exactly what is the source of these sightings and so on, as a scientist, I said, okay, we need to have a clean table. We need to have every hypothesis possible on the table. and then run each of them down with whatever scientific approaches we can use. So I made up a list of, like, what could it be? Well, it might be extraterrestrial, or maybe it's interdimensional because our modern physics has additional hypotheses about other realms that, on other dimensional realms that something could be emerging from. Maybe it's, for example, maybe leftover Atlanteans from 10,000 years ago at the end of the last ice age. Maybe some advanced society survived and have been running a parallel with us, but hidden away in a mountain or seabeds or whatever. And in fact, it's interesting to me that claimed interactions with such intelligences, they're always complaining about we have to clean up the environment, we should stop nuclear bomb experiments and so on. Well, maybe they're hidden out, they're glad to do their thing, we do our thing, but we've gotten to the point we're beginning to affect the planet, which is their planet too, if that happened to be where they were. And so it'd be very reasonable that if they came forward in any way, they would make statements like clean up the environment, no nuclear tests, and hide out by letting people be sure to think that they were extraterrestrial when maybe they're not. So anyway, all those options put out on the table, and then I think what we should do is attack each option and put up all the pluses and minuses and not let anything stand in our way, and finally weed through the options and possibilities. Or it may be that many of them are true. So I think that's the basis that I think we should approach it.
Very exciting. So before we move on to questions from Redditors, Hal, you have a really interesting piece of art behind you. Would you mind commenting on that, sharing a little bit about that with us?
Oh yes, this is you can see it. This is actually made by Ingo Swan, one of the people that I interacted with in an earlier CIA DIA program on, quote, remote viewing, or the possibility of using ESP kinds of effects for espionage. And that was a long, detailed program and so on. So Ingo Swan, who's a very famous artist, among other things, was also, as it turns out, one of the best remote viewers, so-called psychics, that we used in the program involved in espionage using those kinds of talents. And so it turned out that early in the program, while I was at SRI, Stanford Research Institute in California, he visited our house and decided that for having the opportunity, and also as a chance of giving my wife and myself kind of a present for our marriage, he decided he would make a painting for us. And so he actually set up his easel in the basement of our garage, or in our garage, and started painting this painting, which turns out to be the first of many in a series he calls Highway in the Sky paintings. And so what's interesting is you have the asphalt painting with the line down the center, which is the path that most scientists take dealing with the physical reality that we have. But then in the sky, he said there's another path, and there's another highway.
Wow.
And some people like myself and others who are willing to take a look behind the scenes and investigate other options of what might be true in our universe. That's the highway in the sky. So anyway, he gave that painting to us. Now, an interesting aspect was that as he was painting it, I took pictures of it along the way. And I got to admit, it just looked like garbage all along the way until he got to his last step. And then the last set of painting and brush strokes he put on just brought the whole thing to life. So it turns out there's a whole series of these highway in the sky paintings that are among his most famous collection.
Wow, what a treasure and what a great story. That's incredible. Thank you for sharing that.
Yeah.
All right, so we are going to move on to questions that were submitted by Redditors. So our very first question comes from the R Alien subreddit from user DearVirus7159. The question is, question for Dr. Hal. Are you a firsthand witness to UAP or NHI, and have you or are you willing to testify to Congress on the matter?
Well, I'm not a firsthand witness to UAP and NHI in terms of having directly interacted or gotten contact with craft or non-human intelligences. On the other hand, as I said earlier, due to my interaction with other people that I simply have no way of discounting, I certainly think that there's a very strong chance that this is real in the way that people imagine and talk about it.
Thank you. The next question comes from the R HighStrangeness subreddit user KrustyCrab8. Is there any publicly available footage outside of the standard 2017 New York Times article videos that stands out as confirmation of the phenomenon?
I would say yes. Since that original opening up of the issue, we've had other whistleblowers coming forward that have spoken to more and more aspects of the phenomena. As I mentioned earlier, Dave Grush, one of the highest level intelligence officers that I'm familiar with, who did a fantastic behind the scenes investigation of this, comes forward and says there is absolute proof of a, quote, so-called legacy program. It's important that to recognize that not only did he appear in front of Congress under oath to describe this, but he also presented the data to the Inspector General of the Department of Defense and the Inspector General of the intelligence community. And the latter individual came forth and said, this information is credible and important. So when I pick up things like that along the way, I would say that this amounts to further plus points on the scale that begin to weigh that there really is something to this by people whose word you can take for granted. And I've had the opportunity to talk to high-level individuals, I mean, like generals and so on, who've been involved, who claim to have been involved in the program. I can't find any reason to set that aside. So these things that we run into as we move along in the program, I take to all sum up saying, you know, it's the real deal.
Can I jump in here, Hal? Because, you know, Lou Elizondo has, of course, stated many times publicly that the ATIP program has many videos that are even superior, far superior to the gimbal, for instance, which is probably the best of the three we've seen so far. And I'd like to know, like, when you were very closely involved with the ATIP program, were you able to see any of these highly, you know, these better videos? And do you believe that there are some still from that program that should be or could be released?
The answer is yes. I visited Lou Elizondo there in the Pentagon, and as part of the ATIP program, Advanced Aerospace Threat Identification Program, and got to see videos, some of them, and of course, under really pristine conditions. One of the reasons that many of these videos have not been released is because of the location of where they were taken and under what circumstances and in what battle situations they were taken and so on. And they're of unbelievably high quality. So I hope that some of these will come out in the future, and I think they probably will as time goes on. But anyway, yes, the answer is yes, there are additional videos that would be, I believe, pretty persuasive to anybody who got to see them, taken under extraordinary conditions by official government operations.
So isn't there any way they could release even part of those, or somehow redact? I don't know how well you can redact on video, but somehow remove the sensitive parts and just let people see the actual craft that's in the videos?
I can't think of any reason why that would not be the case. And I anticipate that as time goes on, eventually that will be the case.
Oh, well, I know people can't wait for that. That'll be very exciting.
Yes.
Our next question comes from the our HighStrangeness subreddit from username dmacerz. Sorry if I'm mispronouncing that. They say, "Hi, Hal. You once spoke about the decision to not tell the public that was made with a group of people and adding up all of the pros and cons. Can you release any more info about the pros and cons of disclosure, or just specifically why would disclosure have been bad back then? Thank you."
Yes, early on in my participation in these kind of programs, I was invited to participate in a conference. At this particular time, I wasn't even told what the conference was about, but that I had to come because it was going to be the most important conference I'd ever participated in. So, okay. And so when I got there, myself and other people I knew from the intelligence community, from the DoD, and elsewhere. And I was told at the beginning that there was underway a plan to possibly reveal and disclose the fact that non-human intelligence was true, and there were crafts that had been retrieved under a crash retrieval program. And the question was, if given that this is supposedly the case, both Russia, China, ourselves, and so on had this kind of information, should this be disclosed to the American public? Well, I think everyone there, including myself, said, "Oh my God, absolutely." They said, "Okay, well, the way we're going to approach this, we're going to make up a list of all the things that would be affected by such a disclosure." So we made a long list. You start out with, okay, stock market might be affected, religious views might be affected, countries' military aspects might be affected. So make a long list. We got some 60 items or something like this. When you finally get down to the weeds on this list, it was sort of like, okay, if we find out that Corporation A got access to materials from a crash retrieval program, but their competitor at Corporation B didn't, when this gets revealed, Corporation B is going to sue Corporation A. They're going to sue the government. This is going to be an absolute disaster situation. And so at the time, as we went through all that and added up all the numbers, as a group, we came to the conclusion that, there's hardly any way to do this because there's so much involved, first. And then secondly, there's no way to handle it piecemeal. You'd have to deal with everything all at once. And so at the time, like this was back some decades, it just seemed that, especially given that the whole subject area was still tinfoil hat and kind of subject with a lot of stigma associated with it, there's just no way to go forward with this. Now, that's in the past. Now, as we now see in the present, there's been a new approach, which was that, first of all, data has come out. The government has pretty much admitted that there's something to it all without giving any level of details. But nonetheless, we had an amendment proposed in Congress by Senator Schumer, who is, majority leader in the Senate, and Republican Senator Rounds, which they put out a multi-page document to be passed called the Disclosure Act, the 2023 Disclosure Act. And if you can believe it, in an actual government document, you have non-human intelligence mentioned over 20 times, and how this had to be addressed in some straightforward fashion. And so they come up with a whole list of ways to do that, having a presidential panel, having all the information passed on to the National Archives, to go through a process of saying what can be released when, and so on. I think that's a good amendment. It didn't pass in 2023, so they put the same amendment forward in 2024. I think once again it got shot down. But anyway, we have a map of how to do that. And so I think done correctly and under the right circumstances, I think the result is different today. And also the stigma that's associated with the area is now pretty much long gone, and for good reasons, by the way. I mean, back, 20, 30, 40 years ago, when we were into this, what was our data? Our data was some farmer seeing something flash across the sky. Then you had to decide, was he drunk or was this the real deal or whatever? But in the intervening decades, we now have the most unbelievable sensor systems up there. Forward-looking infrared radar, Aegis type instrumentation on ships. And so our sensor program has advanced so far that now you have multiple sensors, including pilots and eyes on, all reporting exactly the same thing and all the data correlating, that there's just no room anymore to say this isn't happening. So I think if we reconsider the idea that disclosure should come forth at the present time, I think I don't think there's any way we can avoid it if it's done correctly.
Excellent. Well, I know that's music to many ears.
Yeah.
Our next question comes from the Alien subreddit from user Ian Voyager. The question is, we have current widespread ability to record electromagnetic spectrum and sense gravity distortions. Have we developed a time or temporal sensory capability beyond setting two timepieces off at the same time than comparing any differences? Could this be a useful sensor to apply to UAP/USO and whatever new terms that come to represent the UFO phenomenon?
Well, I think following up again on what I just said, we have so many sensors that are being deployed simultaneously and in parallel that integrating the data from all these different sensors, whether it's forward-looking infrared radar, ordinary radar, gravitational effects, and so on. I think the answer is just simply yes. There are many things being brought online, and a new step forward recently is, okay, maybe we can't just depend on the government because they're not so open as we've seen. So you have private organizations like Harvard University and its Enigma program and so on, where people setting up their own instrumentations to pick up radar, to pick up acoustics, to pick up infrared and so on. And so I think this movement out of dependence on government for daddy to come tell us what's happening into the private sector, where people are motivated enough now, and because of the reduction in stigma, the fact that people with wealth will come forward to support these kinds of programs, that's a whole new era we're advancing into.
That's really exciting. And, speaking of the stigma, I think that just wanted to say, how important it is doing things like, UFOs investigating the unknown, putting that kind of media out there, because it helps with eliminating that stigma and really does make a difference, it sounds like, in terms of moving this forward.
Yeah.
That's incredible. Our next question comes from the HighStrangeness subreddit from Muga Cat. The question is, what data collection methods are being used to investigate these UAPs? I think we kind of covered this a little bit. Is there anything you wanted to add to that?
I think I've named most everything, I think of, including acoustic signatures as well. Yeah. Perfect.
Okay, cool. Then we'll keep it moving. The next question comes from the UFOs subreddit from EFH1. Can you comment on your work with Ken Shoulders and how his work is mentioned as ideal for further research in one of the AAWSAP DIRDs?
Oh yes, at my Earth Tech International Institute for Advanced Studies in Austin, Ken Shoulders, a brilliant researcher that I first ran into actually while I was still at Sanford Research Institute, where he was, and he was one of the best experimentalists I can imagine ever existing. I mean, he's sort of like another Tesla. And he had come up with a scheme whereby he was able to make plasma balls that held together even electrons, which ordinarily, if you try to push a lot of electrons together, their charge just forces them to take off. But he was able to build devices that actually concentrated them into little, actually circular distributions of intense electron charges. And so we looked into trying to figure out how could that possibly be, and so that took us into a whole new area of the possibility of quantum electromagnetic phenomena, what we call the quantum vacuum electron-positron distribution that underlies most of our physics. That if you dig into at that deep a level, you can get new effects. And it appeared that that's what he was kind of tapping into. And so we examined that from the standpoint of, well, is this a way to tap vacuum fluctuation energy that might be a new energy source? And got some evidence that might be the case, and even got a couple of patents on it. So that work with Ken Shoulders kind of got a lot of people looking at the possibility of, well, let's dig into the quantum vacuum that underlies everything and see if there's a way to tap some of the enormous energy that's there. And been unsuccessful so far, but there are a number of laboratories, Garrett Modell at University of Colorado, California Institute under Bernie Haish and so on. So people are going forth with experiments. So there's a possibility that there may be new energies to tap that would actually be useful as an energy source, for example, although success has not yet been achieved, so it's still an unknown. But nonetheless, that's where Ken Shoulders' work opened up a whole new area of research that I think is proving to be of some value.
Yeah, that definitely sounds like it could be promising. Our next question comes from the HighStrangeness subreddit from Athena Palace. Will Hal Puthoff ever talk about what he knows? Would you consider writing a book to be published posthumously? Sorry about that.
Posthumously, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, I've thought about it. My family is pushing me to do it. Of course, there are a lot of books out there already about everything I've done. So, but in terms of postulating or actually putting in print what I know from being involved in these programs, I'm still a patriot, and I still follow the laws of national security establishment. And so if something is being kept back under secrecy, I'm not going to violate that. So even in a posthumously published book, I would not say things that I've convinced are national security secrets. So I might do that, but if somebody's looking forward to reading it, to suddenly have everything spring out from behind the scenes, that probably wouldn't be the case, although it'd be pretty spicy.
I bet. Leslie, did you have a question for Hal? Oh, I think you're muted.
There. Sorry. So Hal, just sort of relates to the question that was just asked. I mean, you've been involved with this for so long in so many different aspects of it. I'm just curious if you can share or tell us about certain moments along the way where you had to deal with ontological shock. Like what were sort of some of the key realizations you had as you progressed along the path that were just really earth-shattering for you, and how did some of these realizations affect you? I'd just be curious to hear about that.
Well, it's interesting. As you know, my background in exploring these kinds of things goes back some decades. Some of the original things I got involved with, for example, at SRI, Stanford Research Institute, where I had thought of, well, as it turns out, it's interesting, actually. I had just co-authored a textbook, graduate level textbook on quantum electronics, published in English, French, Russian, and Chinese. And nothing like writing a textbook to realize what you don't know. And I recognized that what I didn't know was, well, what about living organisms? I mean, even grass. I mean, is it still just atoms and molecules all the way down? It's just too complicated for us to figure out. Or are there some additional fields that we should be taking into account in physics? And so, puzzling over that, I came across the work of Cleve Baxter, who happened to be a polygraph expert who taught polygraph to all the intelligence communities and so on. And he connected his plants up to his polygraph, and he saw responses coming out of them as he would see coming out of people. So he got the idea, well, maybe plants are sentient. And then he would set up a couple of plants on polygraphs and get something going back and forth between them. And so I thought, well, gee, this sounds really interesting. So I contacted him and said, well, I'd like to do a physics experiment. I'll grow some algae culture, and then I'll separate it, and I'll zap the local half with a laser and see if the other half at a laser link site will show some effect. And let's see, what I will, if there is some evidence for an additional field, a sentient field of some kind. I proposed that to Cleve Baxter. Now, it turns out that one of these things that happens that takes you off to a left-hand turn, it turned out that Ingo Swan, the famous psychic that was strong in our remote viewing program, ran into Cleve Baxter at a cocktail party in New York City. He invited him over to the lab to see if he could affect these plants, and they got some evidence that he could. While he was there, he saw my proposal about the algae experiment, and so Ingo Swan wrote me a letter and said, well, look, if you're interested in the borderline between physics of the usual type and maybe physics affected by biology and so on, why work with algae? They can't tell you anything. You should work with somebody like me. Now, ordinarily, I would just throw that in the garbage, except attached to it was a thick report from City College in New York, where he had done experiments where he sat across the lab from a series of very sensitive temperature measuring devices, and he made the temperatures go up and down on command. Well, I thought, well, that's amazing. So I said, that's when I invited him to come out to Stanford area and let's do some experiments. I wanted to, reproduce something like that. And of course, when I talked to my physics colleagues about this guy coming out, they said, oh my God, these guys are all fraudulent charlatans. You don't really want to do that. But anyway, we had a good instrument, which was, there was a quark magnetometer set up at Stanford. It was electrically shielded. It was magnetically shielded with mu metal. It was superconducting shield. It was acoustically isolated. No way, and the Navy spent millions of dollars on this to make sure, there's no way anything on the outside could affect what was on the inside, this sensitive quantum chip. So I took him there and I said, well, this is sort of like that experiment you did on the thermistors, on steroids. Let's see if you can affect this. He did affect it. He made signals come and go inside that unbelievably shielded instrument. And I was shocked because as a physicist, I'd say, this is impossible. This can't be the case. And not only that, did he affect it? When I asked him, well, how'd you know what to do to affect it? He said, actually, I didn't know what to do. I just looked inside and I saw how everything was laid out. And when I put my attention on it, this just happened as a side effect. Well, remote viewing, the beginning of remote viewing, that was even more shocking. And so I wrote all that up, sent it around. That's when the CIA descended on my doorstep and said, we've got to look into this because the Russians are spending millions of dollars and no American scientists believe there is such a thing. But we looked into your background. You're a naval security NSA officer with high clearances in the past. So would you be willing to look into this? So anyway, my whole life at that point was a giant shock going forward. And then learned lots of things over that particular experiment ran 20 years and all different kinds of things, including, by the way, using the remote viewing to go into the silver futures market for 30 days and made $260,000 by people who could name the object they're going to be shown the next day based on what the market did. So anyway, that was the biggest shock to find out, wait, physics is not what I thought it was. There's something going on here. And so once my mind was open to that, then all the stuff when the UFO and the UAP stuff came along, it just fell right in line. So that's my big story on experiencing shock.
Thank you. That's so fascinating. Thanks, Hal.
Yeah, that's really remarkable. I think we probably have time for one more question with Dr. Puthoff before we move on to our next section. Let's see. So Dr. James Lukatsky, this one comes from, this is from the UFOB subreddit, from Jaggaurnaut 3550. They ask, Dr. James Lukatsky said in Skinwalkers at the Pentagon that in 2011, they penetrated the interior of a craft, but it had no fuel or fuel source. Could it be we have misunderstood and that the craft don't generate power, but redirect energy flows that exist everywhere that we cannot currently perceive, like a kayak on a choppy river? Hence, their movement is so erratic as they are surfing the energy flow.
That's a really outstanding question, and I really pinned Lukatsky down. I mean, after all, he was our connection to the Defense Intelligence Agency, and said, "Can't you tell me anything more? Are you really sure there's just nothing there you can put your fingers on?" And he said, "There just isn't." So you're kind of forced in the position of saying, okay, well, maybe it's energy is being sent from some other location, a mothership, say, and it's being used to power this craft. And there are systems like that that we use, not so exotic as UAP, but nonetheless sending energy from one location to another to create an effect. So it could be something like that. It could be even more exotic. For example, maybe the NHI inside the craft have mastered psychokinesis and they run the craft by some mental process. I mean, as far as I'm concerned, all these issues have to be on the table, can't be thrown out because they're crazy, and have to be investigated. So in the case of that particular craft, I'm just as stumped as I can be, but I think we have to think of all possibilities and chase them down to the best degree we can.
Well, thank you so much for that. This has been absolutely fascinating. It's been an honor to talk to you, and I know everyone's so grateful that you took the time with us this evening. Thank you.
Thank you.
All right. Well, we are going to head into our next segment. We're going to be talking to Dr. Jim Segala, and we actually have a clip to share from UFOs Investigating the Unknown. In this clip, Jim has been studying in manifestations of UAP in a location in New Hampshire, and that's where the clip will pick up. So let's check that out.
I suggested to this person that we need to understand what's going on in the environment. So we put a piece of equipment there that would look at all sorts of different signals. So this device was designed specifically to identify the signals present when UFOs fly by a particular area. I put together as many possible signal sensors as I could, one being a high-level camera that is capable of capturing visual and also infrared spectrum. Then at the same time, I could look for these electromagnetic signals that come off of these UFOs. All of those sensors are mounted and they go to this computer here, which then sends all that information over Wi-Fi up to the cloud where you can view them and you can run it through any kind of models and things like that. We put my device pretty close to his house. And there was a big spike in some of the sensors that indicated something was in the environment that was making a lot of electromagnetic noise. One example is you have the magnetic vector getting hit. Now, the magnetic vector is the gravity. It's very difficult to do that. You'd have to have some very, very massive object, like a moon or something like that, to create this kind of spike. And it also happens with the gyroscopic sensor, which is the indication that these objects are twisting around. Those are just two examples. The equipment collects data all day long. I have algorithms that are looking at this, and what this is allowing me to do is understand a pattern as these anomalous events unfold. So every time this individual sees a UFO and it's followed with some changes in the environmental signals, now I can see a correlation. It gives me the ability to start predicting some of these things.
Well, very exciting. It looks like you have a lot of fun at your job, Jim. Thanks for being here.
Oh, you're welcome. This is great.
Well, I'm going to just go right into questions from Redditors. Our first question comes from our experiencers, from the user Mega Blockman. They ask, if you had unlimited funding and no confidentiality restrictions, what specific tests and experiments would you conduct, and on which types of samples or test subjects?
Well, it's kind of ironic that you asked that. So a lot of the work that I did that came up to this point started out with Hal's organization when I was working with a medical professional. We were trying to understand why were people suffering medical conditions or having emotional conditions or having personality changes when UFOs were present. So at that point, we decided that there must be some external vector that's actually coming out into the person that's actually making this their physiology change when this high energy objects are present. So if I was to be asked, what would be the ultimate experiment that I'd like to get into, is that I would like to take lots and lots of people that see these things and instrument them, and while they're observing this phenomena, record what's going on in the outside world. And if I can actually match a change in these electronic signals or whatever signals with what's going on in what their narratives say that they've seen things, or they're taking photographs. I mean, when you get, that's basically two sensors, right? Your body, your mind, and you have scientific instruments around you. That's two scientific data points, and that's a real data point that you can use in statistics.
That's really fascinating. It seems it's really interesting to me that it seems like some of the best data, or maybe the most available data that we have, is actually the physiological effects that these craft have on individuals. Would you say that's accurate?
That's correct. Again, going back to, it seems everything happens from Hal's organization, but, Hal put me on a team with a medical professional, sent us out to look at injuries that occurred when, bona fide observations have been made of crafts. And we found that there are medical footprints that are left on a body that are verified through the medical people that analyze these people when they, went to the hospital. They got admitted to the hospital with these crazy, pathologies. And, it comes out, they say, we have no idea why this happened. So they call up, and they say, can you guys come and figure this out? So you go there and you investigate, and you get their narratives and understand what their histology is. And you find out that, this is not something that is something that they invented from their head. This is something that came from the outside world. So, when you see things like that, you start saying, well, these things have to be real. I mean, I constantly get called from people that say, we have these conditions, I've developed this weird blood disease or this autoimmune disease. And it just so happened to happen right after, I have a verified observation of some UAP.
That is really fascinating. So our next question comes from our UFOs from Holloway series. Based on your research, what is the single most compelling piece of evidence or data that suggests UAPs may not be of human origin? And why do you find it so significant?
Well, again, it goes back to this whole thing is that, Hal actually talked about this. You have signals that are present in an environment. You have electromagnetic signals. You've got, we got Wi-Fi all over the place, our cell phones. We've got mechanical systems that, show vibrations like the sonic. and then you've got, fermions, so you've got chemical signals. It seems that whatever signals that are making these people have these experiences, right, is not abnormal things. You could put a Faraday cage, which a Faraday cage wraps you in a protective shield that no electromagnetics or no waveforms can come in there. Even when you do something like that, these signals end up coming in. So it looks to me as though these are something that is fairly beyond our capabilities to control. I mean, we know about entanglement, we know about these things, and it's very expensive to do these things. To do it out in the middle of a field, to have entanglement happen in the middle of a field seems to be well above our capabilities. And Hal touched on this, and it's like, you just look at this thing and says, if we did have this technology, it'd be really cool. I mean, it would be great, but it just doesn't seem that we have that ability yet. And I follow the journals of the archives and all this stuff, and you would see some semblance of papers that come out to talk about this stuff, but you don't see that. Where if it does happen, it's happening behind the scenes with something that I can't explain.
Amazing. Our next question comes from the HighStrangeness subreddit from a user Substantial Pressure 3. They say, I've heard about Dr. Segala's sensors, and I know that Dr. Garry Nolan studied the brains of government employees and contractors who were injured by close contact with UAPs. Was any of that data ever used in conjunction with Dr. Nolan's work? Has Dr. Nolan seen that data? And also, where can I find those interviews that Dr. Nolan did about his research, the research comparing Havana syndrome and the injuries suffered after UAP exposure? They seem to have completely disappeared.
Well, it seems to be a question for, it seems to be a question more for Garry, but I will tell you that, I spent a lot of time with this same medical professional studying a lot of the cases from the Havana syndrome. And it seemed that a lot of the cases that we originally studied back in 2015, 2016, which bona fide observations of UFOs had the same look and feel and the same characteristics as the Havana syndrome patients. And there was a great article or a great report by the National Academy of Sciences that detailed exactly what they found. And you could put our research and their research side by side and have the same thing. So if Garry wants to weigh in on what he used for data on his experiments.
Just to be careful, we didn't do any experiments on any individuals. First of all, that would require an institutional review board, et cetera. But we did look at a lot of the MRIs and associated clinical data of many of these individuals. There were at least, of the 100 or so that started, as I've said before, perhaps only about 10 or 15 at the end were somehow related to anomalous events, meaning like UAP or some kind of encounter, as opposed to the majority of them, which could have been easily classified as Havana syndrome. Now, interestingly, the same kinds of obfuscation techniques that are being used around UAP have been used around Havana syndrome. And it appears that Representative Turner, one of the reasons he might have been removed from his position on the Oversight Committee of Intelligence was because of how others were annoyed that he was blocking access to the information around just Havana syndrome. So it seems like the playbook is reused in that context. As to the question of things that might or might not have been removed, I haven't removed any podcasts that I've been on. They might just get removed from disuse or somebody's website goes down or something. I've never felt suppressed around that. I think what was good about Havana syndrome, to the extent that it's good, the information getting out about it, is that there's now a whole class of people who were being ignored, who are now, there actually is, from the Health and Human Services, there is now actually a book out about anomalous health incidents. And that is fantastic, that all of the efforts that we put into it over the last decade, there's now, and that booklet outlines for people the steps you can take as a government-associated employee, military, intelligence, or otherwise, to be seen through the government-associated health system. It lays out who you call, et cetera. So whether or not you're talking about Havana syndrome or some of the things that Jim's techniques can look for evidence that something might be happening to you, or you're talking about something else, there is now a well laid out path because of the efforts of many people to open that up. You know, I have one of Jim's early devices at my house, and to my knowledge, nothing has ever clicked on that Jim has called me about and said, "You got to watch out, duck." Back to you, Jim.
Well, thank you for chiming in on that. All right, our next question is from the UFOB subreddit from Jaggaurnaut 3550. Research from the University of Tokyo and Harvard has suggested that information could be transmitted via cosmic rays and gamma rays. Skinwalker Ranch and similar sites have some strange gamma rays readings. Could this be evidence of said information transfer, but we lack the tooling to decode and comprehend what is being sent?
Well, you know, gamma rays and electromagnetic energy, the electromagnetic spectrum is enormous. I mean, it spans from, you know, way down the big wavelengths down from AM all the way up well beyond gamma. And we don't really have the instrumentation to read the entire spectrum in one shot. We read little snippets of it here and there. So when something strange happens, we can only read what our sensors read. And then we have to infer what that all means, you know, from those little pieces of the thing. So you have to say, what is really happening? First of all, our brain probably has access to a lot more than our sensors do. Our brain has been evolved over the years to probably react to a lot of the ranges that our sensors just don't even get into. So we don't know what that information is that's coming over, but we're working hard to kind of correlate when we see a signal to what the people are actually interpreting. So that's the important thing. I think that our bodies, our brains are extremely good scientific instruments. We just really horrible at interpreting and explaining what we say. So that's why you have to always marry the two together. So it's very possible that the information that is coming down, that is causing these experiences, is a communication. We just don't understand it, and we don't have the instrumentation or the software or the intelligence to, you know, actually text to speech type of thing.
Yeah, that makes sense. Definitely. Our next question comes from the HighStrangeness subreddit from Flips and Giggles. I love these names. What are the potential risks, both physical and environmental, associated with the experimental or practical use of scalar energy? Are there any documented cases of harm or guidelines to mitigate these risks?
I don't know of any documented cases, but I would say that, you know, if this scalar energy is something that is out there and it's used, and we have actually used it in a lot of, you know, to some extent, if that's available to nature, if our brains had the ability to use this thing, you can bet that nature will evolve this into us and use it for communications or whatever. So I don't know of, you know, is there any harm of using it or experimenting with it? I'd say that us as humans, we probably are very used to it if it actually exists. And there's probably no harm unless we start to change it in a way that makes it different than what our bodies have been used to.
Excellent. From the UFOB subreddit, we have a question from bjamin075. As a physicist, do you have a preferred interpretation of quantum mechanics, or are you agnostic about that?
No, quantum mechanics for us is nuts and bolts. It's like, this is our understanding. This is how it works. It's been proven. I think quantum electrodynamics is one of the best experimented and proven theories there are ever. So you have to take that as rote and say, okay, everything that we do is above that. But also as scientists, you can't get stuck. You have to go on that, you know, like what Hal showed you in the picture, you have to go on that high road and be open to other things. So quantum mechanics is very important to us because we feel that a lot of what's happening out there is on the quantum mechanical realm. It's not in the normal realm, which we call the things that like the electromagnetic spectrum and things like that. It's often that realm that things are happening. So, You have to use those tools, and if you buy into that, then you start developing the theories. But again, you can't say, well, just because something that you witness or something you observe doesn't fit into your known understanding, you have to be ready and willing to take the high road and go investigate and try to come up with theories on and extend our theories to include other possibilities.
That makes sense. Our next question comes from the UFO subreddit from Exotic Card. How can researchers get involved in this work, specifically in medicine?
So we, a lot of the times what happens is that people get hurt when their observations or they're, during that whole course of being involved in kind of UFO observations. Actually making that available, with HIPAA in mind and everything, making that available to researchers is extremely important. And that's one of the things that I've been working with, working with a medical professional, trying to get some of this data, get the MRIs, get all that information from people, boots on the ground, people that are actually observing this stuff on a day-to-day basis, millions and millions of observations, as opposed to just a few observations. And, basically it's, get involved with in providing your data, obfuscated as possible and protected for privacy reasons, and get it out and get involved in some of the studies that are available.
That's great to know. I know there's so many people right now who are just itching to get involved, which is fantastic to see.
Well, I think it's important because I think it's important to notice that the Reddit organization is the place where people are coming to say, look, I've got an issue. I'm seeing things. I'm involved. So I think just being involved in the social media and putting your stuff out there is a great first step. I think it's amazing what's happening.
That's such a great point. I agree. I think we have time for one more question with Jim. So this one comes from the Alien subreddit from user Mantis Awakening. Given the physiological effects often reported by experiencers, such as electromagnetic anomalies and changes in brain activity, what experimental protocols could most effectively isolate external influences from psychosomatic responses in controlled settings?
Well, again, it goes back to the whole thing. You can't just take like a narrative, because a good data point for a scientist is composed of more than just one single reading. You have to have multiple readings from multiple instruments. So if you have a reading from a person, in other words, their narrative, what's going on, you also have to make sure that you're monitoring their physiology, you're monitoring the heart rate, or you're monitoring something about that, or you're reading something in the environment. So you have to make sure that you're getting information from multiple devices that are connected simultaneously and within the same time frame. Otherwise, the data it's all anecdotal at that point. So, and we have millions and millions and millions of anecdotal data points out there that really don't give us any statistics. It's just neat stuff. It's when you start marrying all the other stuff, the actual scientific readings into it, that's when you actually could use it in a scientific model.
Excellent. Well, Jim, thank you so much for your time today. It's been so fascinating hearing more about your work, and it's been wonderful speaking with you.
Yeah, it's good to be here.
All right. Well, we are moving on to our third segment, and in this segment, we're going to be hearing from Dr. Garry Nolan. I'm just going to launch right into questions. Are you ready to go, Garry?
Ready to go.
All right, let's do it. From the HighStrangeness subreddit, from user irrelavant appellation. During your recent interview on engaging the phenomenon, you explained that due to the difficulties discussing UFOs, especially the most academically disruptive woo aspect of the phenomenon, you believe starting with more nuts and bolts, scientifically credible elements might be necessary before opening the floor for broader inquiry, comparing the release of information regarding UFOs to giving children sharp knives and highlighting the need for proper preparation before revealing what had the potential to cause chaos. On this basis, and knowing the public have not been told what's going on by those who know, how do we know this is actually to protect us from societal collapse and not to prevent those who control what we know from losing that control?
Wow. So thank you very much for that question. That
Yeah,
had
it's an
about
easy one.
10
Start easy.
layers in it. First, I want to thank you, and I want to thank the Reddit community for their, frankly, their professionalism. If you often want to go anywhere to follow up on a subject matter, the various forums and subforums of subreddit, I lurk. I don't often answer anymore. But anyway, so thank you very much for that question. All right, so the first part of that as to what it is that we should be studying first. I want to disclaim for myself, I'm not uninterested in the many areas of so-called woo. It's just that, as some of the prior questions to Jim and Hal relate, is how do you approach the science of doing an experiment with it? And so, as a scientist, I mean, my way of thinking is I isolate the thing I'm exploring from as many different unwanted perturbations as possible. I perturb in the way that I think is relevant, and I look for a response, and I hope that somewhere between the perturbation and the response, nothing else interfered, such as was mentioned before, a psychosomatic response. So isolating that, and so I don't know necessarily how to isolate, or at least at the beginning, the so-called woo experiments in the fields that I work on. But look, those kinds of experiments have been done for decades, and Hal was instrumental in the Stargate program for designing experiments that made sure you didn't inadvertently let some data slip into the experiment. That would cause the recipient to claim that they saw something when in fact it was actually a mistake. So, but I also have to be realistic about what it is that my scientific colleagues will accept. And so, even in my standard science, the work that I do every day, for instance, long ago, I said, hey, I can make retroviruses in 3 days rather than 3 months. And I told this to the guy who had originally created the technique that made it in 3 months, and a Nobel Prize winner. And they said, oh, it ain't going to work. And I said, okay, well, I'll try it. They didn't laugh at me, but it didn't. So you have to do the experiments. But once I showed that it could work, now all retroviruses are basically made by that technique. So you have to have experimental protocols that you can trust, that you can show somebody else it will work. But once you burn that pipeline and you show people that, hey, this is true, it sort of opens the door for other questions to be asked. And so, I and Sol, for instance, are very interested in the experiencer issue because the majority of the stories out there are from experiencers. But you have to be very careful when you're talking about what people experience, because you're really getting very close to a medical experiment or psychosocial. And I'm not a psychiatrist, and so I want to be very careful about those kinds of things. And so, but by showing that, at least at the beginning, it's okay to talk about materials research. It's okay to do analysis of data that I was brought on people who claim to have been harmed, and that I can come to limited, I wouldn't call them conclusions, but at least provide data and then some framing of how one could interpret what that data means. And then showing everybody, okay, this is okay. And Nolan didn't get boiled in oil for having done it, although I do occasionally get boiled in oil. But and then more people have gotten involved. And for me, that is fantastic, because just like with the Havana syndrome, once it became obvious that it was something worth studying, and the government got involved, I didn't have to do it anymore. And so, the whole idea is to not be the person in control of all of it, but to give other people the tools and the permission structure that they can do it. So I would love to eventually, before my whatever career ends, publish a paper in Nature that says the woo is real, or something to that effect. But, until that time, science is always done incrementally by small steps. And my former mentor, David Baltimore, when I was at MIT, Nobel Prize winner, who actually discovered how retroviruses replicate. I remember in group meeting, people talking about, well, this correlates with that correlates, the correlation. And in my prior lab, we didn't ever really talk about correlation. I said, why are we talking about correlation so much? Why is it all? He says, because Garry, and interesting word choice, because I still remember it, data and results in isolation are phenomena. But when you can relate something to prior knowledge with correlation, you are relating it to the total foundation of human knowledge. So you have to build the castle piece by piece. And that makes total sense. And so, it's those little snippets of teaching and wisdom that you get across your career that you embody and say, this is a principle by which I approach it. So that's really the reason why you take step by step. And then, frankly, as well, there's only so much any one person can do. And the whole idea of creating a permission structure for other people to do it is to be able to bring in others to help. And they are. I mean, just look at the literal cottage industry of organizations that have now sprouted up. And Sol is taking some hand in helping to coordinate intergroup discussions, because Sol doesn't want to do it all. And so it's, I think that's really the value of how we're taking this.
That makes a lot of sense. I think, is it fair to say that to you it seems reasonable that this stuff is taking time to acclimate people to do science correctly, but that over time, hopefully, it might speed up a little bit as kind of some of these breakthroughs become more known?
Yeah, let's just think about the materials research, right? That's the easiest for me to enter the fray, because my whole career, for instance, in biology, has been trying to, as with the rest of biotechnology, reverse engineer the human body. We have this extraordinarily complex organism instrument that really people don't understand how it works. And we're trying to pull it apart piece by piece. And so the rules of how you reverse engineer nature are there. Physicists do something similar. So those rules that I've learned about how to do it, I've been applying to, the materials work that we're doing now. And I kind of use a bit of a carrot and stick approach with it, in that, I'm going to use the tools of science and public funding to the extent that, I'm allowed within the rules and framework that Stanford sets out for me. But when I have seen a discovery reach a point, this is now into my regular biology, of like, okay, this is beyond what it is that I should expect the National Institutes of Health to fund, I go out and I work with a venture capitalist. I work with to basically instrumentalize it and to commercialize it, because the kinds of money that are required to make it work are greater. So the same thing is happening here. I'll go back briefly to the Skywatcher. If people go back and look at some of my podcasts from last year, you can hear me hinting about this, about the need for what I think is a public program to take on, why, if something were to come down from the sky, why should we, and we know that it had nothing to do with humans and wasn't otherwise dangerous, why should we call up the DoD to come get it? If we're there first, why don't we get it? If we know that there are ways to call these things, CE5 being one of them, and I've never seen a CE5 event per se. Well, I did last summer, but it's why do we need to wait for the government to allow us, as Hal said, why do we need daddy or mommy to tell us it's okay? And so you've seen again this cottage industry take form, where you have what it is that Jim just showed you, where people can they have this instrumentation. You have Avi Loeb, You have other groups that are working to put things at sea. I'm advising a group there to put things at sea, to measure above and below. And Skywatcher being one of them. And you can go back again to News Nation and find Skywatcher actually in the news back then talking about the drones, and Jake actually speaking about it, having nothing to do with UAP, again, foretelling what the capabilities were and the seriousness of the operation. But it's not just about UAP. It's to show that these capabilities can also be used in other things that are a little bit more, let's say, banal, like drones over New Jersey. But understanding what these things are and then bringing a professionalism to them has really been what it's about. I mean, I told Twitter, I don't know, it was 5 or 6 years ago, I said, you guys better get your act together.
We haven't.
Yeah, I think they have, I think, but professionalize, at least, well, I blocked half of Twitter, it seems, at this point. So at least in my threads, the responses end up being, professional. And so anyway, that's my thoughts on it.
Amazing. Thank you. Our next question comes from the UFOs subreddit from EFH1. Are you familiar with the hair sample analyzed in 1999 and published in 2005 by Bill Chalker that may be evidence of human gene manipulation using mitochondrial DNA transfer? Would you be willing to look at this sample if it was possible to do so?
Are they talking about the one with the hair that was found?
I think so. Yeah, they said a hair sample. I'm actually not familiar with this one. So
I think it's the one where a hair sample was found after some sort of an encounter. A nighttime encounter. I want to be very careful. But I've heard about it, and that there were claims about that the genetics of it suggested both an Asian and some other ethnic group. And I can't remember what the exact nature of it was. Somebody told me that, hey, we have the sample, we can give it to you if you want. And that was, I don't know, that was many years ago. And I'm going to say the same thing is that I've said about other things is I'm not exactly the right person to do it. There are geneticists who do it, and you need a lot of money to do this. You can't just give it to somebody and say, oh, you're going to go, here's the sample, go and analyze it. Okay, well, doing a sequencing would, cost you $10,000. Writing up the paper would cost you blah, blah. Someone's got to do it, and who's going to do it? Same thing for the Peruvian mummies. I laid out how much I thought it would cost and the amount of effort to do it properly. So yeah, I could lay out what could be done, but there's amidst the Reddit community, there's probably 100 individuals there who could probably do it just as well. I found it insulting, not to me, but to the people, the scientists in South America to say, oh, well, you got to get American scientists in here to do this. That's just garbage. There's plenty of great scientists all over the world. I mean, again, that's just letting daddy be in control.
absolutely. And, that's another call out to the people in the community. There's so many different ways to get involved. Garry can't possibly do every experiment.
And,
so we
and organize yourselves. If you can ask the question, you can find other people interested in that question, raise money, find somebody who might be able to do it, learn how to convince a scientist to do it for you, or with you, or pay for the thing to be done commercially, and go from there. It is citizen science has to be the way. I mean, and that really is the impetus again behind the Skywatcher group.
I love that. That's really fantastic. Our next question comes from the HighStrangeness subreddit from Chessboxer4. One of the biggest obstacles to disclosure seems to be the impact upon the collective perception of science and scientific authority, which has declared the chances NHI are here so minute as to be basically unworthy of consideration. If disclosure makes many of our scientists look incompetent or ineffective, and most importantly, unscientific, How will that impact the scientific community and the collective perception of science?
Well, the first thing I would say is the job of the scientist to be wrong every day. Because tomorrow, after you figured one thing out, you're going to figure out that yesterday you were wrong. And so, yes, I think there will be a lot of "I told you so." I think there will be a lot of head scratching and a lot of pushback. There's still people today who think the Earth is flat. But scientists do have a way of adapting. And so I'm not that depressed about what will happen to the credibility of scientists. I think it's going to be up to the scientists who are willing to convert based on data and results to say, okay, well, this is worth my time to look into. I've taken the time because I've already achieved what I needed to in my career. And so I find the question of whether or not there is something here fascinating. And for all the reasons that Hal laid out and all the people that I've spoken to, I can't see that many people lying about it across a decade and keeping the story straight. So I think it's worth the effort. And what I'm pleased with are not only the number of scientists to come up to me at meetings and say, "Thank you for doing this. Would you actually talk about it publicly, at this meeting?" But also the emails that I get just thanking me. Hundreds of emails and dozens from scientists saying, "This is really exciting. How can I help?" So I think there's probably a lot of people who only because of stigma don't want to admit that they think it's real. Not because they have anything against it. Yeah, there's a bunch of people who are just, sticks in the mud. And that's just, but those people are important as well to have in a scientific community to basically act as the guardrails to make sure that you don't overconclude.
That's a great point. Jim, did you have something you wanted to add to this?
Yeah, I just want to kind of augment what Gary's talking about. The stat I heard not too long ago was that over 70% of the population of the world have claimed to have an experience of some unknown phenomena. So when you start thinking about, is it really possible that they're all delusional? And I think what happens is that the scientists are looking at that and saying, well, yeah, I can't decide. I can't say it doesn't exist anymore. Therefore, there's some opportunities to get into some very strange things where it's almost guaranteed to have some form of results better than what they have right now. So I think just the population at large is pulling the scientists into this, maybe kicking and screaming in some cases, but universities are certainly not putting this on, first and foremost. And NIH is not going to do this, but citizen sciences are going to get funding and people are going to start getting funding for this type of thing. And we're going to start accelerating. I feel that we're going to start seeing more results and more published papers in incredible journals.
We've published on the Council Bluffs material, which wasn't extraordinary from a technical standpoint, but I think we proved beyond a shadow of a doubt that it wasn't the most likely scenario of thermite, because there was no evidence of aluminum oxide anywhere in the sample, or which would have been what you would have expected. And we've studied a number of other materials that are very odd. We're now studying a material that shows some very interesting structure at the nano level. I'm not sure what it means. And the first thing I told the students to do is I said, I want you to go and find every other manufacturing technique that humans know about that might have accidentally made something like this. The last thing you want to do is publish something and then somebody says, "Oh, you idiot. Here it is in the Metallurgical Journal, 1953, of what would happen." And so, it's easy. For instance, the so-called alien honeycomb from New Mexico. That was, there's a book about it. It looks extraordinary. And I have pieces of it until you go into the literature and you find out, in fact, that the exact threading loop is actually a fishnet loop and was used in the 1950s to keep resin in place as you bonded two pieces across aluminum honeycomb for aircraft. It's all there, how you make it, what it is, an actual picture of it. And so it's not alien honeycomb. And so the claimed isotope ratios, you can look at the results and you go, okay, well, I don't know who did this mass spectrometry, but those are clearly di and triatomics. They just basically didn't know what they were doing. And so, I don't like being the person to come to the table and saying, well, it's garbage, or you misinterpreted it. All I want to do is say, okay, well, let's look at it again the right way. Anyway.
That's really interesting. I hadn't heard about that honeycomb case. That's fascinating. Our next question comes from the subreddit UFOB from Beautiful Throat 111. Based on your knowledge of the subject and your medical background, what do you think would be the greatest benefit, cure, treatment that humans could get from alien tech or alien intelligence? To phrase it another way, which disease, if cured or treated based on NHI, would have the greatest positive impact on humanity?
I mean, cancer, right? Cancer and autoimmunity are the two biggies. Mental disorders. I think it's interesting because what the question made me think of when I saw it in the list was the same thing. It was a similar kind of answer of when people say, well, if there are aliens that walk amongst us, could we see them genetically? Are there examples of hybrids? And could we detect them? And my first response back to that is, well, however it is that you might desire to engineer a human requires a depth of knowledge about how the biology of humans operate, and the reverse engineering that we don't know what it is, that we just don't appreciate yet, and a knowledge of DNA that we simply just don't appreciate yet. So if to the 10th power, hybrids are a real thing, you're not going to hybridize with something from Alpha Centauri. You're more likely to hybridize with a carrot than you are with another species from another place. So to me, the only way that hybrid as a term would operate would be that somehow humans were manipulated, taken aside, a separate group or colony was set up, and they were essentially grown or kept as a group by whoever it is that collected them, not that they're slaves or anything, and that they were manipulated in some manner. But again, it requires a depth of knowledge that would allow for manipulation and synthetic biology that we just don't have right now. So assuming that something like that could happen, then that would mean that it wouldn't be that they would walk out and down the gangplank and say, here's the cure to cancer. That would be a mistake, frankly. It would be, here's what you need to know to figure out how to do it. You never want to give people things because that makes them lazy. What you want to do is teach them the way that they can learn it themselves. And so what I would hope, if there were any kind of interaction, that it would be, here's the direction you should go, and here are some new kinds of tools that you require. People have heard me talk about atomic imaging and things, and so I'm just taking it into my own hands. I think the next level of research and understanding to accomplish the kinds of biology that we want to do for cancer, for instance, is atomic imaging and understanding the bond structures between atoms, and we just don't have that right now. And people have heard me talk many times about this. I mean, in the last year alone, I've had 6 cancers. I've just had stuff removed all the time. I've got huge surgery coming up because of something near my eye.
Oh my gosh.
And but it's okay. It's okay. People have it worse. It's something that we need to solve. So that would be, if there could be anything, it would be cancer. And then autoimmunity. I mean, all of it, cancer and autoimmunity, all revolves around the immune system. And so understanding how the immune system operates has been I've developed, half a dozen instruments that help the world do that.
I mean, that's incredible. And I'm sure there are so many people, if not most people at this point, watching this live stream who've had cancer or who have someone that they love has had cancer. So it's really important. And thank you for the work that you do on that. We'll move to our next question from our aliens. This is from Vecnu. Sorry if I'm mispronouncing that, 2477. Considering you have worked with CIA and aeronautics corporations before, doesn't your recent material analysis conflict with this relationship with government agencies? I'm worried you're going to be bullied by triple-digit agencies into stopping your research, which I think is fascinating, by the way. Thank you for doing this.
I haven't been bullied. Apart from that one phone call I got that said, stop talking about conversations that went on in a place that you're not supposed to know about. Luckily, they didn't ask me who I got that information from. And I forgot, so don't bother coming asking me. It's no. In fact, one of the whole reasons why I've been pushing this atomic imaging is because once I finish making this device, I hope that it will cause people to come to bring things to me. And to the extent that it doesn't break national security laws, I want to publish on it. And when I say bring things to me, I mean exotic materials. I happen to have something that I think is exotic. And but I also told the students who are working on it, this belongs to you. You will publish this. I put it in writing. We will publish this, and it will not be taken away. So, because that I think is the only way that we move forward. This whole keep it all quiet and keep it for yourself so you can there's nothing wrong with making money on it. File patents, do whatever you can, but get whatever level of information out. I mean, proving beyond a shadow of a doubt that a material was made in no way that humans can accomplish would be as close to the smoking gun as would be, an alien walking out at the Oscars and giving the nomination speech or acceptance speech.
I love that. Awesome. So our next question is from our HighStrangeness, and it is Girl of 100 Lists is the user. Same girl. Experiencers often describe entering altered states of consciousness during UAP encounters. Do you think these states are key to understanding the phenomena, and could tools like meditation or psychedelics provide controlled environments for further study?
So I think there are two elements to that question. One is the state imposed by the phenomenon, and is the person perceiving exactly what happened, or is it something being transmitted into their mind? So that it doesn't matter whether it actually happened or not, but if somebody has the capability to transmit such an experience into your mind, it's as good as it having happened in the first place. It still is, to me, evidence, if you will, of something extraordinary. So that's the first thing. The second is then the flip side of the question, which is there something about the percipient, either their state of mind, meditation, or some enabled state of mind, use of psychedelics, that allows the brain to accept information in a manner that is that it wouldn't normally have access to. Whether it's something like remote viewing or clairvoyance, or the 50th generation of Neuralink from Musk's great grand it. So, you know, I don't have a problem imagining, for instance, appropriate manipulation of electromagnetics that could make people perceive and hear words or perceive and hear questions if you were sufficiently advanced. Where and how you would access that in the brain and how it's done and how it's focused, I have no clue. But I don't have a problem thinking that it would happen in the future. But I also know that our brains and the proteins and the atoms of which they're composed sit in the matrix of space-time. And we're all just interacting with each other via quantum fields. I have no problem, just as Hal alluded to at the beginning, that there might be field structures or patterns or things that we are not fully aware of yet that are also a part of space-time that can be used to transmit information from one place to another without electromagnetics. What fascinates me, though, is that when people have these experiences or get these ideas, they come in almost all at once, like the remote viewing. You know, when I've done a couple of remote viewing with actually Ed May, the images that I got were kind of all at once images. And so it wasn't like it came in by Morse code and I decoded the Morse code, ... you know, blip, blip. It just came in all at once like a glyph. So that means that the information came in across the entire structure of whatever it is my consciousness represents and imposed itself within milliseconds. And so I just, you know, to me, that just fascinates me. How does that happen? What, you know, I asked this at the Soul meeting last November. Can you imagine the level of civilization required to accomplish something like that? Or the level of understanding of the physics of the universe of what it allows to accomplish that? Because if you just ascribe it to magic, well, no one's ever going to figure that out. But if you can basically say, this is what's required to accomplish it, then you can start to think about what kind of instrumentation or physics is required to do that. And then you can back engineer through sort of a form of reverse engineering of how do I get to that? It's kind of like those video games where you have to build this, and this before you can build that. And then you need this, that, and that before you can build the next thing. And so chemists, for instance, reverse engineer the making of a target molecule by figuring out what the sub pieces are that they need to make. And then they say, okay, well, these don't exist. I can't just buy these off the shelf. I have to build these. So now I have to break down how to do that. And you have this synthesis path of how you build up the components. So it's just like I build a satellite, I have to build all the components. So if I want to put a satellite in space, how do I do it? If I want to transmit information from one brain to another, what level of instrumentation do I need? What are the receivers? And, you know, I find psychedelics fascinating as maybe something which enables it's known to turn off they're known to turn off the default mode network. And so maybe that's what's required. Maybe that's why people have experiences mostly when they're sleeping, because the default node network is turned off. They're more receptive to it. So yeah, there probably are. I mean, people claim that there are procedures for this, and they claim to interact with things on a regular basis. I think that's another place where citizen science is being put to work. In fact, I know of venture capitalists who are putting money into it. The same kind of venture capitalists that have put money into Skywatcher, because it's risk. They have enough money. They see that the value of the result is not just monetary, but societal. And so they're willing to put that money in almost as if, well, if I lose the money, whatever, that's fine. Let's do it.
Do you think we're going to see something like a gold rush, or like similar to something like with the, .com boom or something like that? with technologies coming from this field?
I hope so. Yes, if the stuff ever gets out, if the alleged materials ever get out. But I think even in the absence of materials ever getting out, or let's say that this is one giant illusion, even if you're only imagining seeing something going at 5,000 miles an hour and taking a left turn, seeing that and saying, I want to do that, is halfway towards figuring out how to do it yourself. And so, all the work that Hal and others have done over the years is exactly that. Man saw birds could fly, so the myth of Icarus was born, and eventually the Wright brothers got it done, but Michelangelo or Da Vinci drew what he thought would be necessary to make a helicopter, or something that looked like a helicopter. So people have been thinking about this because they desire the capability, and then they figured out how it is that we can use nature to accomplish that goal.
Fascinating. Our next question comes from the Experiencers subreddit from Ornery Size 8530. If technology is an extension of our senses and natural abilities, like Marshall McLuhan thought, I hope I pronounced that correctly, then it follows that UFO technologies are amplifying an innate ability a human being already possesses to some degree. To what degree, that seems to be an open question right now. Do any of you have insights on that? And it would be great to hear. I think this one probably isn't just for Gary. I think Jim or Hal, or if anybody else wants to
One of the other guys step in there. I got to figure out whose name.
Yeah, I think if I could weigh in on this a little bit. So part of the research that I've worked on is getting information or getting narratives from a whole host of people, hundreds of people. And it always seems to be pocketed as far as, who really reports the really cool stuff, the stuff that's really deep down. And it seems that there's a certain sector of people that, like Native Americans are extremely good at this. They are very intuitive people that have done it. So a lot of that type of thing you get where, certain people seem to be just much, much better at doing or interpreting this information that's coming from this phenomena than other people. There's other people that it just washes over their head and they don't even realize it's happening. But there's other people that are just really good at understanding what it is and interpreting it and coming up with a narrative that explains it very accurately. And it seems to be, maybe not genetic or upbringing or religious background or whatever. It really is just, it's amazing that there's certain groups of people that are just really good at this.
And that might be cultural because they're taught not to ignore it,
That's
or
right,
they're taught that it is part of their natural world. And so they see it. There've been plenty of studies of that. If you're told that something doesn't exist, you just ignore it in the environment. And I call it the mirror test as sort of a sign of intelligence. You put a mirror in the jungle and see which animals figure out that it's them. So this might be a form of a mirror test. Maybe it's us figuring out that them is us.
That is really interesting. Did anybody else want to weigh in on this one?
Well,
right,
another
go
interesting
ahead.
thing, it seems that a lot of people that have suffered some form of brain injury or some form of, it doesn't have to be an injury per se, maybe, they spiked a 104 or 105 when they were younger or something like that, seem to be much more intuitive and report a much better narrative of their situation than others. And it seems like that just washes away all of like what Gary said, the stacking of all the norms that are piled into us as we grow up and go through school and go through our education and things like that. It might strip that away. It just seems that it's very odd that there's high percentage of people that have had injuries in the past or have some conditions in the past that seem to be the ones that are much more intuitive.
My explanation for part of that has been, people have, some brain injury or a medical issue, and they go brain dead, and maybe what's happening is, and we now know that certain parts of the brain can reform. And so if you have damage, there's going to be neural growth and maybe paths between parts of the brain that weren't connected before or were otherwise blocked because of just natural processes, and you've matured and that part of the brain just gets turned off. Maybe you've grown a new connection. And I actually find those people more interesting in some ways than those who have a natural ability, because if you can look at the before and after in some way, then that tells you what it is you need to do for other people who might want it. Right? That's sort of that's kind of the clue to how it is that you might enable it in somebody else without them having to go through a life-threatening, heart attack or car crash.
This brings to my mind the telepathy tapes. I don't know, Gary and Jim and Hal, if you're familiar with those, but these some of them adults, but autistic young people that are non-speakers who are telepathic with great ease. And it seems to be that whole group of people has this special ability. I don't know, Gary, have you thought much about that?
Yeah, I mean, sometimes what I wonder about, and let's just talk about even not just telepathy, but in autistics, high functioning ability to, compute the square root of some prime number to the nth power. And what it maybe means is that to live in this world, our brains are programmed to have certain formations. But if that, in an autistic, some aspect of their social interaction is blocked, but the brain, other than that particular block, is still trying to connect with itself, it builds a capability, or it enables the growth of a capability that would otherwise be crowded out in a normal individual. The brain always compensates. I mean, biology compensates. And so that's the way that I think about, these telepathy tape children.
Right, because they can't communicate verbally, so they find another way to do it.
People who are blind are known to be more sensitive to motion in their environment. Many are. You basically you listen to something that you didn't pay attention to before because you were so otherwise overloaded with information from your eyes or your ears.
Right.
In fact, in the remote viewing program at SRI, we decided to do some remote viewing with a person who was blind from birth. And what they described was exactly the path that someone took to go to a remote site based on all the feelings they would encounter, something blocking the pathway, the fact that when they got to the site, it was an uphill climb, and then the building was narrow and long because of the kind of sounds they heard were what they would associate with that kind of a building. So it's really interesting that actually we got a really excellent description of a remote site on the basis of somebody who had no visual clues or words to use in describing it.
That's all really fascinating. Thank you all for weighing in on that one. Our next question comes from the UFOs subreddit from Dave Lawn. If the connection to the source occurs via the caudate putamen and it is a vestigial ability, how can we revive this dormant capacity? What is the best method to achieve this, excluding the gateway method? And if it cannot yet be disclosed due to controlled disclosure processes, when will it be revealed?
Well, first of all, I know nothing about any controlled disclosure of anything, frankly. I mean, but sort of dissect that question about the caudate putamen. So the caudate putamen is a central nuclei in the brain, collection of nuclei. And nuclei in this term only means a collection of nerve cells that subserve a particular function. That processes almost all the data in your environment that the sensory apparatus can collect. And it tells the body how to move. In fact, 30, 40 years ago, people only thought that the caudate putamen and basal ganglia were involved in movement, until people realized, well, to move, you need to know the world in which you're trying to move. And so you can't, so somehow that movement has to be associated with a processing center that knows what you want to do. And then it has to be able to build goals. And then they found out that it wasn't distributed across all of the brain, that goal forming and figuring it all out, and it is all processed subconsciously in the caudate putamen. And the basal ganglia is actually thought of as now as the brain within the brain. So when you ask the question, where might such information be processed? And that I was talking about, that glyph that seems to come, it somehow still has to be processed within the basal ganglia. So what better place for the antenna to be connected to than there? I mean, Hal was there when we had that aha moment looking at the data with Jacques Vallée and Kit Green. When we were looking at it, it was that aha moment that it was like, whoa, these individuals that have a higher density of these connections, actually, a couple of them were remote viewers. And so that was kind of the aha moment that, wow, they're actually at the top of the list, the top of the pile in terms of the connectivity. And so does it prove anything? No. But what it does, it's that correlation that says, this kind of makes sense. And so, I know of an individual who is doing experiments, and he has the capability to do these experiments in people to try to stimulate this area of the brain transcranially.
Oh.
And, so we'll see what the results are.
Wow. Yeah, that's really interesting. Jim or Hal, did either of you have anything you wanted to add to that? No pressure. No, we're good. Okay. We will move on to our next question from our experiencers. This one comes from Oak. Some experiencers are able to call in orbs or spheres of light. Is there any specific interest in these particular experiencers over others? And are there any theories, or can you speculate what these orbs or spheres of light are versus traditional UAPs?
Oh, I'm going to get into so much trouble for even trying to answer that one.
Good. Let's get in trouble.
So what they are, let's start with that. Again, yes, I know of people who claim this ability. I haven't seen it myself. But that doesn't mean that I won't speculate. If anything, they certainly, whatever they are, seem self-motivated, right? And they seem intelligently controlled. Seem. If. And so, okay, that's fine. Let's say they are. Okay, well, what kind of object could do that if it passed through something wouldn't leave a trace? Or, could it pass through a window? Well, these things have been seen to pass through objects. Can they pass through metal? If they're somehow electrically composed objects, I would think that they wouldn't be able to pass through metal. But then we know of videos within protected environments where these things have been seen to show up. So somehow they did pass through it. So what is it? I don't know. I have no problem, though, imagining that consciousness can embody itself in a form of space-time or plasma, if that's what you want to call it, as a self-organizing principle and object. I have no problem with that. But I also have no problem imagining that it's kind of like, again, what Hal was talking about, where it's an advanced scout object that is controlled from a distance, maneuvered from a distance, and transmits information back to the controller from a distance. And just because somebody calls for it and it shows up doesn't mean it's magic. It could mean that the person driving it or running it is specifically looking for that kind of a signal because they know that that person will see it when they call it and will interact with it. So imagine you're a species from the Andromeda galaxy and you're sending these probes through quantum wormholes or something to look at the humans on planet Earth. And maybe you've done enough observation without doing anything, without interacting, but now you want to see, okay, well, let's poke the monkeys and see what happens and who can see us. And what would they do when we do this? And what information can we pick up when we get near them? So it's kind of like you think of it as an anthropologic study. I don't know. I'm just making it up. But it's like Hal said before, until you can take the hypothesis off the table, all hypotheses are allowed. You can rank order them and say, these are the ones that I think are more important versus the ones below. And here's the threshold above which I can test. And here are the ones that are frankly ridiculous, like micro elves run the universe, unless you've done DMT. And people do think that there's micro elves running the universe. I've never done DMT. So
well, that's why you don't know about the elves.
I know, believe me, I'm like, so anyway, I just find it fascinating. I mean, there's too many pictures of them, too many videos of them that you can't ignore it. Doesn't mean they're real, but I just can't ignore it.
Garry, what have we learned about the ones that pass through the human body? So can you learn because of the symptoms that are incurred in the person who's had them pass through them? Can you learn more about the nature of the object itself or the orb?
Well, one of the people that I think it's a well discussed case of an individual who had something like that happen to them. They did have scarring within their body, as seen medically, and this is a kind of, again, the reason why I like medical and materials is because I can go back to that person and take another X-ray of them or another CRT scan and see the scar and see there's a linear path through the person that showed that something happened. So what that tells you is that the object interacted with human physiology in sort of an electromagnetic manner that caused the scar. So that tells you it's not some effluvial, thing of matter or of objects that has no interaction with our universe. It interacts with things, so it's not like completely exotic. At least that particular case.
Interesting.
So
Jim, did you have something you wanted to add?
Different versions of them. Sorry, go ahead.
No, I was go right ahead. I was just seeing if Jim had something to add.
Yeah, I think it's important to note that, I mean, it's, the question actually brings up a lot of interesting connotations here. So an experiencer summoning something is, right now, it's a fallacy that all we are is receivers, and we are just sitting here being inbound antennas. But you don't forget, antennas go both ways. I mean, any antenna you make or buy or whatever actually can transmit. So that we can transmit out information to the phenomena is actually quite revealing, because now if you can do that and communicate with it, you might be able to have a dialogue of some sort. So if they can summon this phenomena to happen, and actually, to be honest with you, if they can summon it, that means that you can have a much more controlled experimental laboratory where you can bring these things in. But just the ability to go out to something and communicate with something is significant.
Yeah.
Do you know of any cases, Jim, where verifiably, that you've seen people, or that you're aware of people having that ability to call them in or interact in that way?
Yeah. So I have, maybe 100. So again, I have thousands of these narratives, and it always starts off sometimes where they say, I sat down, I meditated, and I brought in all this information. So it seems that when people put themselves in a situation, they have the ability to do something that causes the experience to happen. And then, if there's a medical condition that happens afterwards or whatever, it seems that there are certain people that have the ability to create, there's a sink as opposed to, or a source as opposed to a sink.
And this kind of relates to the question from before about, will scientists be embarrassed by new discovery? Just in the last year or so, neurophysiologists have shown and proven that, the alpha, beta, gamma, theta waves that we all know about are not just there because there's some side product of how the brain functions. They're actually there to organize how the brain functions. And information is passed from one area of the brain to another via the resonances. And so scientists are excited about it because it explains a lot. Like part of it seems to be a clock that keeps the system running like a CPU clock. The other seems to be passing information back and forth, and it organizes how the brain is functioning. And we know of some individuals who claim to have abilities. Tyler Henry being one of them, for instance, who was hooked up to one of these an EEG and when he went into the state, I think it was his theta waves went off the charts.
Yeah.
And so and he was receiving information. And so, for all I know, and Tyler, I apologize if don't take this the wrong way, he could induce a state that was comparable to a DMT experience. I don't know. So, or a state that we would want to be able to medically or instrumentally induce in somebody so that they could have such interactions. I mean, certainly meditation is, I wish I had the willpower to sit down and meditate long enough.
Yeah, it gets tough.
I'm too easily distracted.
Absolutely.
Yeah, well, it does appear to be a correlation. I know someone was interested up in Canada, a fellow by the name of Dr. Persinger, as to whether there was some functioning in the brain that could be measured when people were doing remote viewing. And so he had Ingo Swan come up to his laboratory and put on this helmet where they're measuring basically low frequency electromagnetic signaling. And so he did remote viewing and they were measuring these signals, and they found that during the periods in which he was getting good results, the signals look a certain way, and when he was not getting good results, it looked a different way. So he felt that he had come up with kind of a pattern of what works for remote viewing. But what he did was, to follow up on that as a test of the hypothesis, was to bring in other people, like student volunteers, and then he put the helmet on, and then he would induce that kind of brainwave activity. And it turned out they apparently did good remote viewing and experiments when that activity was being generated. So there does seem to be actual correlations between what we do, even as we move off into a paranormal area, and what our brains are doing.
That's also fascinating. Anyone have anything else to add before we move on? All right. Thank you guys so much for all of your insight. This will be our final question before we move on, but this also could potentially be answered by, obviously by Garry, but by anyone also, if you have something to add. So this question comes from the UFOs subreddit from Wild Moonshine 45. It says, first, I appreciate your work that you've done with the UAP topic. Has any progress been made on the shadow biosphere research you mentioned last year? Are there any papers out on this topic you have completed and that are available?
No papers. I did, out of my own pocket, pay for a drone for this person to do more work on it. I've not been in contact with him any longer. His videos are all over Twitter. I forget his Twitter handle offhand. And that was what stimulated me. So there's nothing secret about that. But I did what I could to provide him a better drone or camera system. So I thought it was interesting. You know, he had repeated videos of objects that looked weird. I mean, yeah, again, they could have just been something natural, but so the short answer is no. And again, I wish I had all the time in the world. I wish I had a whole research institute and I could people it with 15 professors who would feel completely free to work in this area. But, you know, setting up an institute at a place like Stanford, it's in the $50 to $100 million range before Stanford gets interested enough. Money does make universities come running.
Yes, that makes sense. Does anyone else have anything to add about the shadow biosphere or something, anything related?
No.
Okay. Well, Garry, thank you so much for your time today. I know it's incredibly valuable. It's been an absolute delight getting to chat with you and to hear your thoughts on all of these incredible topics. So thanks for being here.
Yeah. Well, and thank you to the others. I learned quite a bit.
Oh, that's good.
I even learned a couple of things from Hal that I didn't know, and I've already sent you some texts, Hal.
Okay.
That's great. I love that. All right. Well, we're going to move on to our final section. And our final section, we're going to be talking with Leslie Kean. Leslie, first of all, congratulations on UFOs Investigating the Unknown. I watched the whole thing. It's absolutely incredible. So just congratulations. I know how much work you must have put into all of that.
Well, thanks, but I really want to congratulate Break Thru Films, which is the film company that made the thing. I mean, they're responsible for how it looks, how it's edited. You know, they're really the ones to get the credit. I had a specific job to do, which was to bring in the right people and deal with the content of it. But I just want to take my hat off to them and how grateful I am that they stick with this topic and have been doing stuff with me for years and years. So I just want to make sure they get the credit that they deserve. But thank you. I think it's a really great series, especially for people who don't know a lot about this, or people who have friends or family who maybe want to learn more or are skeptical and need to be exposed to sort of the basic information and the cases and everything. I think it's really valuable for that. So anyway,
Absolutely.
and there's some new stuff in it too, but I you know, sometimes the UFO community gets annoyed when I come out with something and they say, there's nothing new here. And I always have to tell people, we didn't make it for the people who already know things, who already know everything. You know, we made it for the people. The whole point is to reach a broader audience that hasn't been exposed to this. And that's our target audience.
Yes, it's very important. And, you know, our online UFO communities, we soak up every bit of information so quickly that there's no way. I don't think you could. Yeah, absolutely. So I'd love to move on to questions from Redditors since we still have some more time. Let's start with this question from our UFOs from Golden Tate Warriors. You've written extensively both on UAPs and on paranormal and metaphysical phenomena. What is your take on the relationship between these fields, if any?
Yeah, I mean, that's a really big question and a hard question to answer. I definitely think there is a relationship. It's really hard for me to pinpoint exactly what their relationship is, but there's incredible amounts of overlap. And, you know, when I wrote Surviving Death, which is the book I've written on the sort of consciousness element in 2017, it came out. I hadn't even thought about there being any connection to the material I had in that book to UFOs. Like, to me, they were completely separate topics. I think it was because I'd always just reported on the nuts and bolts aspects of UFOs. And since then, you know, I've become much more aware of and more accepting too of the sort of HighStrangeness paranormal aspects of the UFO phenomenon and how they all interconnect. And I don't have the answer of exactly how, but, you know, there's we know that, for instance, that consciousness is affected by encounters with UFOs, that consciousness play a role in how people, in the perception of UFOs here. We've been talking about people that can call them in. People develop paranormal abilities sometimes after they have a UFO encounter. Certainly the experiencers can tell us that the experiences they have involves both physical components and consciousness components or psychic components, or however you want to call it. There's this fusion with UFOs of both realities. So yeah, I'm just looking at a few notes here. I mean, Whitley Strieber has done a lot of work on this, and he has situations where there are near-death experiences, which is something I've written about, where people encounter what look like gray aliens, or people that have UFO in close encounters or abduction type experiences and report seeing dead people within those experiences. So, I don't know how literally we can take all of that. We can't document any of that, but there does seem to be this crossover between also sort of principles relating to the afterlife and to the UAP phenomenon. Whoa, sorry, I just caught on my headset here. So, I really think that, I certainly believe that consciousness functions independent of the brain. And I think I showed that very, very clearly in Surviving Death. And there is some kind of field of consciousness out there. There's some kind of field out there. There's other dimensions. And so the UAP could dwell in the same space or dimension as a lot of the paranormal phenomena that we observe, and a lot of experiences that people have with afterlife phenomena. I'm no expert on that. I just observe what everybody else observes, and I can't really say what it is, but I definitely believe more and more, and the more I learn, that there is some kind of overlap between them. And, the scientists here who have studied them may have more scientific explanations for, like Hal, who has looked at these things on a scientific level. But I'm just looking at it as a journalist and as observer, and as someone who's had my own experiences along these lines. And it's all a mystery to me how it interconnects, but I'm pretty clear, and personally, I believe that it does. And I think hopefully we'll learn more and more about that over time. But I don't know if anybody else wants to add anything to that. I'm really open to anybody else chiming in, because you guys are scientists and I'm not. So, but
well, we can move on if nobody's got thoughts.
Okay.
But
yeah.
But I agree. I think it definitely feels like that is the next frontier for us as humanity. So that's really interesting.
Yeah.
Our next question comes from the Experiencer subreddit. How can experiencers contribute? I'm sorry, this is also from Long Jumping Lime 6571. I don't want to not say their name. Sorry about that.
Okay.
How can experiencers contribute towards healing the stigma surrounding the topic? Many of us have been treated unfairly due to our experiences, yet are amenable to open discussion with sympathetic parties.
Yeah, I'm really glad that this question is being asked, because I think it's really important. And one thing I'm really concerned about now as I progress with my work is to find a way to give more of a voice to experiencers. And I made this comment at Soul, and we also covered this in the series, that experiencers need to be taken seriously and listened to. And I think gradually, just through that process, the stigma is going to lessen. And I think it is lessening. But I think there's some things we can think about, such as, how experiencers talk about their experiences. I think it's really important that, if there are really weird aspects of this that just can't be really known if they're true or not, and they're kind of inconsistent with other people, that you just try to focus on sort of the core elements of it initially to get it out there more. And I think, what's really important too that I want to share is that at the Archives of the Impossible at Rice University, the John Mack archives have now all been given to Rice, to the Archives of the Impossible. And there is an institute called the John Mack Institute that is directed by Karen Austin, who some people here might know her, and she was at Soul. And they're going to do a metadata study on all the archival material that they got from John Mack and Whitley Strieber and others. And it's going to come out in a couple of years, and they're bringing in top level scientists to help with this study. And I think that is going to make a real difference in terms of getting credibility for experiencers. I think we need more funding. We need more academics and others to get involved with this. And sometimes, as Garry said, it's often about funding. There's so many great studies that could be done, but who's going to provide the money to study weird experiences that people have? So I wanted to encourage your Reddit participants, because one of the questions is how can they get more involved in discussions? Well, the John Mack Institute, and with Karen at the helm, has a lot of experiencer discussion groups, and they also have support groups. They work with therapists who help and helps experiencers process what they're going through. And we had one of those therapists in the series in episodes 4 and 5, which might be of interest to the experiencer group people here. His name is Simon Bressler. He's an incredible human being, and he has a full practice, but he also gives a lot of his time to experiencers. So I talked to Karen before coming on here, and I just wanted to give out, invite people to contact the John Mack Institute who want to become more part of a discussion and a process with all this, and to find a community, and that all the groups together can kind of formulate ways that would be productive to become more public with this. I mean, Garry mentioned that a lot of the groups have been getting together and interacting, which I think is really important. But the experiencer community particularly needs to, coalesce and kind of formulate ways that they think would be best to bring their information out in a way that the society can handle it. It's got to be organized, it's got to be clear, it's got to be gradual, and we have to find a way to integrate it into the broader narrative, which has so far been just focused on national security and military things. So I wanted to give out this email address to anybody who might be interested in getting more involved at that level. And it's info@johnemacinstitute.org. info@johnemacinstitute.org. And you have to remember to put the E in there, which is John's middle initial. And I would encourage people to do that. And I just hope that I'm really behind supporting the experiencers and working hard to try to find ways to bring this into a more cohesive narrative that can be brought forward. And I think the experiencers have a lot to offer us. They have data. And that's what the study is going to find out, putting it all together and finding out what's repeated and what kind of data points are useful for further study. And so all of that needs to happen. And I'm very supportive of that. And I want to help that process as much as I can.
I want to just quickly add, we had Karen and the John Mack Institute giving a talk at the Saul Institute. And so I want to put out a bit of a, I don't know, there were people in the community who said that Saul was not interested in experiencers, and that I addressed the question earlier that the woo was, which I mean, frankly, couldn't be more ridiculous. We literally had Karen up on stage talking about it. I'm an experiencer. So, I think this notion that not this, but that, the circular firing squad that we so often see in diverse communities, really, we need to lessen, because just because I'm interested in one thing doesn't mean I'm uninterested in something else. But I think the experiencers need to put forward a case for why something or some aspect of it should be funded. At Stanford in the medical center, we put forward cases of why certain cancers need funding, and we wrap a story around it. And then that becomes a dedicated funding objective for charity. And so similarly for the Soul Foundation, we're putting together projects that can give a donor a reason to, give money.
Right.
Same thing for experiencers. There's many kinds of experiencers. It's not just like experiencer as one big giant package. There's, as you were alluding to, Leslie, there are subsets of them, any of which could be targeted. And there's wealthy experiencers.
Absolutely. You'd be amazed at how many people who are out there involved with this issue are experiencers. They just don't talk about it. 70%. So, the Archives of the Impossible at Rice University needs, they need support, financial support, and like everyone else. And so if there are people interested in furthering research on experiencers, the broad range, as you say, I think they're doing an incredible job, and they're really worthy of support. So I just wanted to share that.
Yeah, so I just wanted to mention that I've done a lot of work with experiencers over the past 10 years. And what's great about it right now is that a lot of experiencers are coming out and giving their story, but it always seems that their narratives are sometimes tough to read by other people because they always have that look of, okay, well, this guy's a little crazy and stuff like that. One of the greatest things is that right now the AI technology or natural language processing technology is available to take all these narratives and strip out the pertinent data. And so no longer is it a narrative from somebody that's sitting there writing after they've had this profound experience. It's actually from a AI model, which has stripped out all the pertinent information and turned it into a really good, significant scientific data point. So having you guys, the experiencers, bring out all this stuff, but then having the tools that can turn that directly into scientific data without somebody's clicking off and saying, okay, that's not going to be useful. The models don't care because they can pull all that information out. They can make sense of it. So I think that we're at a crossroads here where the AI technology from like Facebook and Google and all these things are being focused in on experiencers. And now they're actually the ones that are creating the data. And that's the stuff that we've been using right now to pull out this information.
That's fantastic. That's just what we need, that kind of thing. And that's why, I haven't been able over the years as a reporter, I haven't been able to really report on many of these experiences because there isn't hard data. It's somebody telling a story. So that's why we need to get it categorized as data. And then it becomes more acceptable.
And we have the tools.
It's so great. It's so great. Yeah.
That is wonderful. Okay, well, here is another question from the alien subreddit from Piratiku5. Never know. In your sittings with Stewart Alexander, have you discussed with the spirit team the phenomenon or NHI? If so, what information was given to you by the team? And maybe you might want to explain a little bit of that just for people who aren't maybe as familiar with that part of your work.
Yeah, Stewart Alexander is a physical medium in the UK who I have studied and worked with for probably about 7 years now. I studied his work. A physical mediumship is a type of mediumship in which he goes into a trance state and physical phenomena occur in the room that everybody can witness and participate in. I mean, that's it in a nutshell. I could talk about it for half an hour, but I'm not going to do that. I did write about him in Surviving Death, and he also wrote a chapter in that book. So I'm very interested in his mediumship because these miraculous things take place over and over again, and multiple people can witness it. So the question about, and so there are voices that come through Stewart when he's in a trance state, which means he's not even present. And they allegedly are deceased people who are speaking through him. And these are what we mean by the spirit team, which you just mentioned. It's a number of them who have been working with him for years and years, and they have very distinctive personalities and voices. And by the way, all his archives, Stewart Alexander's archives, are at the Archives of the Impossible at Rice University, even though he's still working. He donated everything, and you can go and listen to audio tapes of these meetings, these seances. So the question about NHI, I mean, I have asked, and they really don't know anything. That's the bottom line. It's not like they're running around with gray aliens or anything like that, and wherever they're coming from or wherever they are. But one interesting event did happen. I'll just tell this little story, which was really interesting to me because it was at a time when I was wondering a lot about the connection among all these different components of the paranormal and with a UAP. And there was one meeting we had, one session, and what happens is I join these weekly sittings with Stewart and the circle he works with through the computer. So I attend every week, but I'm obviously not in the room because it's in the UK, but I can hear everything and I can dialogue and participate in anything that's going on in the room. So in one of those sessions, one of the circle members, as soon as it was over, we were still sitting in the room, suddenly asked me, like, how's your UFO work going? And this was a person I've known for years, and she has never asked me about UFOs, never been interested in it. She just suddenly started asking me all about my UFO work. So I answered a few questions of hers, and I thought it was kind of strange, but fine. I'm glad she's interested, And then she this other strange thing that happened is she normally, after every sitting that happens every week, when it's over and everybody leaves, she goes back in the room, the meditation room, and does her own meditation. And it's like something she does every single week. And for some reason, this particular time, after asking me about UFOs, she felt compelled to go outside. She didn't really know why. She also felt compelled to take her phone. She walked outside and there were 2 UFOs hovering above the house, or I guess it was right across the street, above the house across the street, just in plain sight for her. And she took a picture of them because she happened to have her phone with her. She texted me and sent me the photo and then looked back up and they were gone. But I have those photos. And unfortunately, we weren't able to show them today, but I'll find a way to show them to people who are interested. But it was kind of interesting to me because that was sort of a connection between you. It was sort of like a message. There's a connection here between UAP and this otherworldly meditation that we're doing with this medium. And that somehow there was a way of, I mean, I know it sounds far out, I'm putting myself out on a limb here, but it's hard not to interpret that as that somehow she was being directed in some way to plug into that by being curious about UFOs, by going outside with her phone, which she never does and didn't really know why she was doing it. She kept thinking, oh, I just want to get some air. So anyway, I just wanted to share that story because that's the closest connection that I've ever had to the mediumship of Stewart actually having anything to do with NHI.
That's really fascinating. Thank you for sharing that. I think this will probably be our final question of the night. It might be a little tough to, but put you in the hot seat just a little bit. This is from Evie with C from Our Aliens. What have you been told about possible disclosure related events in the future?
I probably haven't been told more than anyone else. And, I don't like to try and predict things. Of course, we all know, like tonight, we're having a new whistleblower who's going to come forward. We were talking about that earlier. That's a big step. I think there will be other whistleblowers that hopefully will come forward. The more you have, the more you get. So I think that's a really important component of the whole disclosure process is more and more people being able to come forward and feel safe doing that. I also think more congressional hearings will probably happen. And the other big, wild card in all of this is what the new president's relationship will be to this. Tim Burchett, the Tennessee congressman who was one of the key people in creating setting up the last hearing, told me personally that he has spoken to President Trump about this issue, that Trump really does care about it, and that Trump will do something. We don't know to what extent, but Tim said, there is no way I'm going to let him off the hook on this. I'm going to keep after him. And I promise you that he's going to do something. So, and I think other people are sort of expecting that possibly he will, and maybe he won't be as, as kind of intimidated and, manipulatable as other people have been in the government. So, and he's the kind of person that just doesn't care. He'll just say whatever he wants. I don't know. I'm not commenting on him politically, but I think it's sort of interesting to me to see if it will really be different under him. I also thought it was interesting that Ross Coulthart, I don't know if anybody saw this, but he had an interview with Don Jr. recently about the thing with Barber that's going to be happening tonight. And it was like Don Jr. was incredibly supportive of Ross and everything he's doing and of disclosure and transparency. And here is Ross with a direct link to President Trump through his son, who seems really into it. So that's something I don't think we've ever seen before. So who knows where that's going to go? I just think it's going to be a really exciting year.
I also think people should set their expectations about even tonight or the upcoming months. Part of my talk at Soul was about standards of evidence. My standard of evidence is different than, say, an experiencer. I mean, once you've experienced something, you don't need anybody to tell you what you heard or saw was real. But if you want to convince another scientist, well, then there's a different standard that's required. there's people who say, I'm not going to be happy until an alien walks out on stage. Well, fine, then go away, and stop being such a downer. It's the rest of us are working at it. So that's the way I look at it. It's if you need somebody else to give you permission to believe something, then you haven't grown up enough yet.
I love that. Any other final thoughts from the speakers before we sign off for the night?
No, I want to thank the Reddit people. They're right. This has been amazing.
Oh, well, thank you so much.
It has been amazing. And there's a huge team of people working behind the scenes. I can tell everybody that. Yeah, and they're really great and really enthusiastic and competent. And all the people that come on Reddit and have these discussions are amazing and really smart. And I'm just so glad we were able to do this. And I want to thank Garry and Jim and Hal for coming on.
Well, I'm appreciative of your group putting together this whole situation where it did draw in so many people with so much interest from the internet. And so it was a great opportunity. I thought it was really a very, very good show.
Yeah. And audience, good questions, by the way.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Yeah, we could go on and on. I'm sure there are a lot more questions in the backstage there. But
how many people did we get? How many viewers did you get?
I haven't been keeping track. Probably several thousand last I checked. Oh, Andrew says 8,620.
Great.
And there'll be many more as it rolls out. So it's been absolutely wonderful to have you all here. I want to say thank you to the Reddit mods for inviting me to host again. This is like an absolutely delightful way to spend a Saturday evening, and I've been thrilled to do it. Thank you to our speakers for being here and giving us your time and your expertise. Thank you to everyone who showed up, who watched in the live stream, who commented, who asked questions. This is such an incredibly cool collaborative community event, and I love seeing what we're able to do when we all come together. So thank you to everyone who has been involved. There will be a recording of this event that is going to be made available to you as soon as possible, and a bunch of other videos, so stay tuned for that. And please go continue the conversation. So much was said here. I'm sure there's so much more that we can say about it. You can continue the conversation on the subreddits. You can go to our aliens, our experiencers, our HighStrangeness, our UFOB, or our UFOs. And the conversation will be continuing in all of those places. So please come join in the conversation there. So, and also make sure you go out and check out UFOs Investigating the Unknown. It's on Hulu. It's on Disney Plus. If you've got friends or family, especially who maybe are starting to pay attention to this news story as things start to evolve over the coming weeks and months, make sure you point them in that direction. It's a great place to point people who are newer to the topic and people who have been exploring it for a long time as well. So thank you again, everyone. And I hope that you have a beautiful rest of your weekend.